we are good to go. Hold on a second. All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I think we're good.
Yay! We don't have to fiddle with everything.
I know. I actually, am prepared this time.
It's okay. Um, I'm actually glad that you played Quantum Break because my other husband, Sean Ashmore, is in that game.
Oh yeah, I'm surprised they had a lot of big actors in that actually.
hmm They
I
did.
was
They
like, "What?"
I don't know. I haven't seen a video game that did the novel concept like they did, where it's like you played a game and then it plays out a freaking TV show based on your
Yeah.
decision. It's pretty
They
cool.
had they went all out. There was a whole like live action episode.
hmm
And I was like, they went all out. Like there was a budget for this.
There was. There was.
Awesome. Well, everyone, this is Dr. Neurofourier. I'll have him introduce himself here in a second, but this is Taco Tuesday number 10 and part 2, a continuation of our discussion from 2 weeks ago. If you missed part 1, you can type !Neuro, Neuro in chat. There is a link in that chat command to watch part 1. It also can be found on my YouTube if you wish, if you prefer that. But otherwise, part 1 was 2 weeks ago, and this is part 2. We are going to be answering the questions that we missed out on last time, as well as dive into a few of the new questions we received since. We do have some leftover #StopAsianHate related questions that we're going to cover first, and then we're going to dive into the bulk of our discussion, which will be covering COVID-19, the vaccines, the pandemic, etc. So there's a lot for us to go through, so we are going to dive in. However, don't forget, you can still chip into the conversation, chat with us, tell us something that you went through, share your experiences. If you think of something while you're listening and you're like, oh, but what about this? Like you end up thinking of a question, don't hesitate to ask. We are going to be reading chat, Dr. Neuro included. So if you do have something you want to say to him, please don't hesitate. You can tag him in the Twitch chat, whatever works. We are reading chat. Sound good?
hmm
But yeah, Dr. Neuro, take it away. Let us know who you are, what you do, where we can find you on socials, all that good stuff.
Sure. Thank you again. I'm Neurofourier or Dr. Neurofourier or Dr. Neuro. It doesn't matter. I'm okay with responding to any one of those. I am an infectious disease specialist within the U.S. State Department. I focus on a lot of humanitarian crisis settings and a lot of work in a lot of vulnerable migration and groups like that. I also focus a lot on kind of like the domestic policy development within the Biden administration. Also did some work within the Trump administration to focus on COVID relief. So that means me following a lot of research that's going on, a lot of the developments, and also do a lot of health science communication on Twitter. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and everywhere else, but Twitter is my main platform where I typically tweet up-to-date news regarding what is going on, what are things you should know, and just kind of like sifting through a lot of the academic, what I call academic chatter for the main populace. So, but yeah, that's where you can find me.
And I highly recommend following him on Twitter, especially for like what is it, misinformation correction. I don't know what the technical term for that is. Clarifying
Okay,
information, because
that
Dr.
works.
Neuro is very like against misinformation, especially around COVID, right?
Mhm.
So that's what he does. So please like follow him for some of the most up-to-date stuff. Like it's a great way to get informed and keep up to date with what's going on. Which can be a lot, especially from if you're just a regular person like me and you're not in the field. It's hard to keep up sometimes. So he's a great resource, like hands down. So please go follow him. My mods will drop his Twitter link in chat so you all can follow him there. He does stream on occasion. So if you do want to follow him on Twitch, you can. But Twitter, like he said, is his main platform. So please, at the very least, follow him there. I highly recommend it. So. All right, without further ado, we are going to dive in to the remaining Stop Asian Hate questions.
Cool.
We actually have one here from Batch from back then, from the previous part. Do you have a proposed solution to cutting down racism and ideally eliminating it?
So the concept of racism, or just racism in general, like it's a very, it's what I call the multi-headed hydra like problem, right? Like you cut off one head, 16, other heads pop up as a result of it. I mean, like, and I think one of the many challenges when we look at racism is that we always look at it very like, let's address this problem and not ignore pretty much like the rest of like what the main issues are. So we can look at it from like many things such as like economic issues, making sure that we're economically supporting and making sure that we're not downtrodden a lot of like minorities, the job market, the also looking at law enforcement and making sure resources are available. Even discussing like legislation and things like that, it typically is very geared towards, you know, we don't have many like folks who are on the Hill for Congress that really fight, really do fight and champion racism issues. I mean, there are active like congressional members right now who don't even believe racism exists, or just think that racism is pretty much the fabric of the United States, so it's just what it is. So I think like one of the many things is that it needs to be a very much a you know, us making sure that we're getting very involved in politics. Like I know a lot of people here, and this is something we touched upon last time as well. Like we talked about like how we need to be much more engaged in politics, and I know that people are not, don't have the energy or feel like they can't do this. And one of my things I kind of really emphasize really is that like I don't think we have much of a choice if we want to make sure that our generation and above, or even future generations, are going to have a chance to have true equality or true equitable, treatment within like a society as well until we do something. And that means like grassroots movements and like making sure that we're actually electing local officials that will support these agendas, making sure that we are pushing for good legislations that are actually meaningful to all groups, not just the rich 10% of folks. I'm not going to sound like Bernie Sanders here, but I mean, the idea is behind it is that like, there's a lot of powerful lobbying movements that are against a lot of minority groups. And they are very good at fragmenting a lot of kind of like the kind of like the grassroots movements for that purpose. So I think one of the many things we need to be doing is really targeting those, making sure that we are getting engaged, even if it means like being tangentially engaged. And what I mean by that is like someone who might not be the person who goes out door to door or whatever, but someone who takes a second to write a letter to their local leaders that are there right now and making sure that these issues are something that's like up on their radar, and also making sure that you're getting educated on things. Snow has put out a wonderful list on, her, I think it's a Google document that pretty much like lays out like all these resources and kind of like stories and like things like that that talks about the Asian American experience. I think even reading through that makes a world of a difference. And also just in general, like addressing like, like our own misconceptions. Like that's one of the many things that like I feel that's been really great with a lot of workplaces as of late, is that we've been doing a lot more diversity and inclusion discussions where we're talking about our own biased, our own biases, our own kind of like judgment that we actually pass on, that we don't even realize certain languages that we're saying is actually offensive or passively aggressive to a lot of folks. So getting educated, being trying to be active as much as you can within your capacity, and also kind of really understanding what are some of the pain points for a lot of these minority groups is one of the biggest things you can do. It's one of the things that for me, I will say for myself, like as a cis man, that I will never speak for the experience of a trans individual. I want to elevate their voices. That's what I should be doing. I should be elevating their voices. I should be talking to them and getting their stories and really, elevating that. But I should never ever have to speak for them. I should be supporting them, and there's a difference between the two. So there's a lot of ways there's a lot of things you can do to support it. And I think it really just drives down to just being a lot more attentive and being a lot more receptive to new knowledge and just understanding that you have very, I guess, like, especially for our generation and everything, I think we have gotten to the point where right now where we're starting to realize our own limitations of perceptions of society in general. And so I think it's good to kind of realize that and be much more open about it.
Yeah, lots of really good points there. I definitely agree with all of it, but especially want to emphasize the points about, in my opinion, a lot of the current, I guess, proposed solutions and things, they're not 100% perfect, right? And I do think there needs to be more focus on the grassroots level and the community-based, solutions and initiatives out there, because a lot of these stories you've been seeing in the news about the anti-Asian violence and hate that's happening, what they don't talk about is how those victims and the victims' families are recuperating. How are they recovering from that? They're not getting access to the resources. There's so many GoFundMes that are happening to help them pay for medical bills and things like that after those attacks. And that is a problem. Like, why are they having to resort to crowdfunding to help themselves in light of such a drastic and terrible attack, right? Like, that's like happening with every incident, and that should not be happening. So I think there should be solutions. More aid, more resources for people, especially these victims, because that shouldn't be the reality. What's your opinion on that, Dr. Neuro?
Absolutely. I mean, like the thing is that like this has been something we've elucidated for quite some time, that any vulnerable population. So let's not even talk about just Asians, but the Black community, abused women, all vulnerable groups. Like those are like. So this is kind of more of a public health thing, really. Like we don't really talk about how underfunded those places are. No one ever talks about it because it's like they're very hard to empirically measure in their successes, really. And as a result, as it sometimes suffers in terms of like funding wise. And I know some of my colleagues will kind of differ in their opinion on that, but I do feel that from a policy perspective and also from a funding perspective, we need to be much more engaged on funding in a lot of these interventions and a lot of these like very successful programs, so that we are not leaving any vulnerable population out in the loop just because they can't simply afford a funeral, or they can't afford necessary health care because they were in a horrific accident. In no one talks about that. I mean, like I think when that recent shooting with those ladies that were in the salon, we haven't heard anything about them since then. Like I don't think there's been anything in the news cycle since then. We don't talk about it. I don't even know what the status on a lot of their families are. It's just not trending. So it's the unfortunate factor.
Yeah, and I think it raises that kind of problem, that I think
Mhm.
will help, not only with I guess not necessarily reducing racism, but giving that proper support so that you're not leaving those victims of racism and violence and racially motivated hate. You're not leaving them hanging, right? Because I
Mhm.
think that's a big issue that people don't talk about. It's not covered in the media. No one really knows what's going on. And it's just, they focus on the fact that it happened and then the tragedy. And then when it's not hashtag trending, they move on. And I think that's something that, in order for us to actually fully eliminate racism, which again, I don't think is going to happen in our lifetime, unfortunately,
Mhm.
but it would be nice. I would love to be pleasantly surprised, and prove wrong. But like, in order for that to fully go away, we have to have these support networks in place. We have
Mhm.
to care about these people that are vulnerable and often discriminated and hated on and everything. So just some really
Mhm.
good points there. And I do agree with Dr. Nero's point about more grassroots level kind of stuff. Like, yeah, we have the federal legislations and things like that being pushed through, but that alone is not going to solve it. That alone is not going to eliminate it. It does start with the very kind of intangible stuff, like how you see, you know, the kind of interactions within your personal spaces and what you can do personally, even if you're not the affected group, what you can do to help and support.
Yep.
Right. So
Absolutely.
really good question there. Bash also asked, do you have a personal story of discrimination? This can be entirely up to you. You don't have to go super in depth. Again, whatever is most comfortable for you. I don't want you to feel like you have to dig deep or anything. So just feel free to go.
No, I have no issue with that. I think it's good that folks who are comfortable talking about it have that story. I'll discuss this as like a very, as an openly gay man, also as an Asian. Racism is like, not that it's not any different from this heterosexual community, but from a homosexual community, it's pretty bad. There's actually it's actually a running joke, actually, which I'm not a fan of, that, you know, that white gays will typically date other white gays. That being said, when I was doing the online dating scene, or like probably during my college years, I was on Grindr, which I think most people know about at this point. And was talking to someone, and I would get anything from like Asian fetishizing like comments, to outright people calling me, the C word, outright without prompted or anything like that, and telling me that I should go kill myself. Like, these are people within the own LGBTQ community telling me that type of stuff. And so like, and sometimes like I remember there's this one time I went on a date with someone, and I thought like this person was cool, and we were in the middle of like a dinner or something like that, and like probably like midway through the conversation, they immediately said, you're cute for an Asian. I immediately put down my fork, and I was just like, what is that supposed to mean? And I could tell he immediately knew he really screwed up right there by saying that. And I knew he was coming from a good place, but it was just so poor in terms of like how he executed that like I was just like, I actually don't want to hear it. And I like picked up my stuff, and I was just like, have a good life. I really hope that whatever viewpoints you have there, you don't take that with you for your next date. And I just left. We never talked again. It's just, I mean, that's just like the type of stuff that I dealt with. Like I'm married right now to a white man right now. Like, and he's right now at work. And not once did I ever felt when we were dating or with his family that we were different. Like, in fact, it was like his mother made it a point to try to understand my culture, was so receptive about it, and so was his family, and they met my family, and like everyone hit it off well. Like, I never once felt alienated, and I could tell you that that's like something that was something I was looking for. But the actual discrimination and racism is so bad that I remember I was watching a news, and the Grindr app actually took off the filter for race and ethnicity because it was so bad that people were just like outright blocking people or not talking to people based on the skin color. And that wasn't even just Asians. I mean, a lot of the Black community felt supremely discriminated in that app as a result of it. And I'm sure like a lot of the straight community probably feels the same way too, as well in their dating apps. So I mean, like, I think like I think a lot of people ended up like showing their true colors when like it came down to like dating and stuff like that, which is why I always like laugh when someone tells me like racism is not a big deal as it used to be. I was like, no, racism has always been there. We just put it into a new name. We called it preferences, and that's pretty much what it came down to.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Damn. But I mean, it goes to show that racism is everywhere. And there's a lot of people that, even if they don't necessarily intend to, offend or harm the marginalized groups that they do by saying what they do, it happens. Impact is different from intent. And, even It's everywhere, unfortunately, and people have to realize that some of the stuff you say, if it sounds bad to you, if you have to question like, wait a second, then it probably is bad, and you really should sit back and be like, okay, so what does this tell me about the biases I have? Because everybody has racial biases. Doesn't matter who you are, you have it inherently. Whether or not you intend to, right? Shaped by your experiences, what you went through, what you saw other people go through, and in the end, everyone has biases against other people, whether it's based on skin color, whether it's based on whatever. And it's all about acknowledging that you have those, because having those biases doesn't inherently make you a bad person. And that's something I've been trying to teach people throughout all of my like Stop Asian Hate rhetoric over the last couple months, is that even if you thought these things, right? Even if you subconsciously used to say certain things that were and are considered now racist or offensive, and that you didn't mean to back then, it doesn't mean you're a bad person that's incapable of change. And I think it's all about acknowledging, right, that they're bad now, so don't do it, right? Don't say it. Why, and just kind of make it a learning process about yourself and about the people around you. So thank you for sharing that. As for me, so I grew up with a lot of racism growing up, but I kind of never really thought about it especially until this year. But I remember a very distinct moment when I was growing up. I was in high school, I think it was. And back then, landline phones were a thing all the time, right? And people could find your number in like a phone book or whatever. And there were these kids, I don't know where they came from, but they found our house number and they would call and just start saying racist things. I'm not going to repeat them because they knew that we were a Chinese family, the only Chinese family in that neighborhood, which was pretty common in the South, in a lot of neighborhoods. But I remember I ended up answering once because they kept calling, and I told them, stop calling. I don't remember what I said. It's been a while, but I remember telling them to stop calling and to basically, fuck off. And when they called back again, my dad ended up answering, and his English is not that great, but he was trying to tell them off too and told them to stop calling. But I remember hearing the kids go, "You have a white Chinese girl at your house. Who was that white Chinese girl?" Like, as if me having English fluency made me not Chinese, maybe not Asian American. Like that's real fucked up if you think about it. The fact that they're attributing English fluency to white people only. Like, there are people who think that way. And that stuck with me. Can you see why it stuck with me? Like, have you ever had that, Dr. Neuro, where someone was they just hear you, they don't see you, they hear you, and they just assume that you're a white person?
Yep. All the time.
Yeah. And it's just
All the
like,
time.
And I feel like that was back when I was in high school, and that was, some odd 15 years ago, but still, I feel like those views are still very much there. And people need to realize that, like, things like English fluency are not a Eurocentric only thing. It's not just only white people that speak English well, especially in the United States. Oh my goodness. And I still get that now. I've had people come into my Twitch chat and they'd be like, "How is your English so good? I wouldn't have thought that you'd be, it's just baffles me.
And yet they can't even complete a full sentence. It's amazing.
Yeah, like it's just, So if you're one of those people that has those kind of thoughts, maybe I don't know. I'm trying to kind of play the devil's advocate here, so to speak. If you didn't grow up with being exposed to a lot of people of color, that doesn't mean that you're incapable of learning what it's like out there, all the different people that are out there, and realize that, like, saying stuff like that is not the compliment you think it is. So.
And I also want to point out that I think the excuse is even less of an option here, more so given the fact that everything is online. Our exposure everywhere worldwide is so ubiquitous. Like, for us, like I would say, like for us, like in the '90s, like or anywhere old, below that generation when the internet wasn't a big thing, social media wasn't a big thing. Our exposure to everything else in the world was very limited. Like it was pretty much like your exposure to the world was the Britannica library in your library. It
Oh
was that
yeah.
fucking thing. And then you were just like, okay, I'm gonna explore India, and you would have to grab out the eye.
I remember that. Yeah. Those were
But
the
like
days.
now these days you have TikToks, Twitter, Instagram, and all these things, and all these influencers that are traveling the world. Like there's so many different cultures. There's so many different things that are out there that when someone truly comes in and they are that ignorant, to me, I just think there's not much of a room for excuse, really. Like, especially like if you're on Twitch itself. To me, it tells me that you are capable of creating an account. You're capable of getting on the damn platform. You can type and you know English, obviously. It takes you 10 seconds for you to type out, like Asian history or world history, and really just take 5 minutes to do that bit of research to really kind of expand your horizon. And so to me, like a lot of times I feel like, and this is just my own personal opinion, someone can feel free to correct me, but like 70% of these cases really are just people who just plain out don't want to be educated or don't care to be educated. And that's what irritates me a lot as a minority when I see this. It's like I was just like, you have all the tools in the world. You have every single information on the tip of your fingers, and you actively choose not to engage in educating yourself or providing, and it's all free, by the way, so it's not even that, but you choose not to engage on that. And that's like, that to me is like the big, like, I guess, stickler, and what makes me even more mad when I see like a lot of the stuff on social media and everything like that. Like, and especially with COVID and everything, even more so, like it gets me even more pissed off when I see people who do that. But, from a racism perspective, it's just like, I don't know what to say at that point except to try to like continuously engage with and try to engage with them, or you just block them out completely and give them less of a platform.
No, I actually agree with that. I mean, when I was telling my story, that was 16, 17 years ago. So that was before the internet as we know it. I mean, the internet was there, but it wasn't to the scale that it is now, where there's so much information and you literally have no excuse, right?
Mhm.
But back then, yeah, I mean, the internet was around, but it definitely wasn't the way we know it now. And I
Yeah.
think you're right. It literally doesn't take that much to just sit down, Google it, learn something, And not only that, but like a lot of people, especially in these kind of racism discussions, a lot of people, well intentioned people, I think, turn towards minorities, turn towards people of color, and put the onus on people of color to educate them. And I have qualms with that.
I do too. I do too.
Yeah. And
I
I
hate that.
think for me, I don't have necessarily, I'm not against helping people learn because I do think that this is a learning process for all of us, including those who are marginalized. But it shouldn't be completely the responsibility of people of color to give you these resources. Some of us
No.
will do out of the kindness of our hearts, like my AAPI resources, which is a Google Doc that I'm still updating over a month since I published it. Please check it out if you want to learn about anti-Asian hate, if you want to learn about the history we have, which is a very rich history of Asian Americans in the U.S. So it is all there. And I do recommend, making some effort. You don't have to sit here and pour over it for hours and hours and hours. You can take like maybe 30 minutes a week just to sit and be like, okay, what is something I want to learn today about this, right? That's really all it's about. So, yeah. Do you have anything else to add, Dr. Neuro?
No, I just really hate that phrase. Like, thank you for educating me on
Yeah.
on that. I get really annoyed about when like big social media figures do that, and I'm like, that should never be our job. I agree. Like, it should not be our job to educate, folks about minority issues and things like that. Like, it is like a day-to-day basis on items that's going on in the rest of the world. The fact that you are actually engaging and that you say, thank you for educating me. I'm like, no, don't thank me. Do it yourself. That's the best way you can thank me. Like, don't tell me don't thank me. I want you to actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, I mean, even since the Atlanta shootings, when I got really vocal about just Asian American history and stopping Asian hate and everything, I've had people like within my circles on Twitch that would approach me and be like, "Hey, teach me," basically, and I was like, "No, just because I'm the token Asian person you know on Twitch, like." And it's just a bad look. And I don't recommend doing that. I think it's
Mhm.
more than anything, listen to, the voices of the people affected. Listen to the voices of people of color sharing their experiences. And then let that inspire you to go out on your own and look up some resources. And in the case of Asian American history and Asian history in the US in general, I have conveniently put together some resources, so it's not like you have to work that hard in the end. And then Batch made a good point in chat. There is a docu series on PBS. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Dr. Neuro. It's
I
free to
have,
stream
yeah.
right now on PBS. There's 5 episodes. It's called Asian Americans, and it gives the omitted history of Asian Americans in the U.S. and a lot of the stuff we didn't learn in schools. It was really surprising to me. So, very good stuff there. Thank you so much. Our next question also comes from Batch. Batch is asking, do you think the rate of anti-Asian hate will drop once the pandemic is over? Do you think another pandemic, originating in Asia or not, would create another rise in anti-Asian racism because of memories of this pandemic? This is a good question.
To the first one, I don't think we're going to see a drop, like a precipitous drop, but we might see somewhat of a dip in it over time. I mean, this is just a generation of folks who have very short-term memories about it. But I mean, I do feel like it is still going to be pretty high. Like, I just think anything above several numbers is not, I don't think we should be playing a numbers game at that point. Um, do you think another pandemic originating in Asia or not would create another? Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, here's the thing too, and like the reality of it as well, and some of the many things that a lot of like really racist like biologists and I've seen like zoologists and things like that point out is just like well, China has a very flourishing wet market, and all these things like that. That being the basis. I mean, that is like one very possible idea of a spillover effect in terms of creating a new disease or a new virus. But we have to look at other factors too that can contribute towards that. And so absolutely that they probably will incur. But I think it'd be very naive to say that it will go away completely. Like, it's kind of like, like, racism against blacks. Like we thought, I think a lot of us like didn't really think of anything until like the recent shooting and like police brutality stories we were hearing. But if you talk to an actual person about it, and again, I'm not speaking for them, they're like, "What are you talking about? This has been an issue for a long time." It was not until like someone died that we actually elucidated the story. So again, I think we're going to still see it, and it's going to be continuously happening. But until we do a lot more intervention from the bottom up and from the top down, like we're not going to see it go away. Um, but I mean, yeah, I don't think it's going to go away, and especially like this pandemic has left a very lasting memory to a lot of folks. And also, we had a president that was very much like using very harsh language and rhetoric that 4 years is a long time to do damage and a lot of damage also like I mean this is like Trump had a huge issue with Xi Jinping way before even this coronavirus started happening. Like he had a lot of back and forth with them, and I think that unfortunately that resulted in a lot of backlash within the Asian community, even though like not all Asian subgroups are the same. Usually a lot of these like anti-Asian groups will just group everyone together anyways. So racism against even one subgroup of like Asians will affect everyone. And so I don't foresee it going away. If another pandemic hits, chances are we'll probably get blamed for it. Probably. Um, and I just don't I just think that we need a very huge overhaul before we start seeing actual improvements. Like, I mean, we've been talking about, police reform for quite some time, and it's kind of addressing the police brutality for Black Americans. And to this day, I have yet to see actual, like, robust, overall, like, comprehensive proposal being put forward. No one no one has said anything.
Yeah, I think it's what you the point you made is right, is that the racism that kind of came to the forefront within the past year is not new, right? It's been there, and the rhetoric of our previous president emboldened the racists who were already there, because
Hmm.
the way he was conducting himself, the things he was saying, was basically telling those racists who were already racist that it was okay to say those things, and that made them emboldened. It made them be like, okay, I'm allowed to say it because Trump is saying it. And so that's what's leading to this sort of scapegoating. We are all being scapegoated for shit we didn't do. So in the end, it's really shitty that, like, it's people want someone to blame. And Trump said it was okay to blame anyone who looks like they're from Asia. And that's the truth of
And
it, right?
I hate to say this too, because it's like I don't want to like say that I don't appreciate some of the assistance that we groups have, but it's just like as soon as these events occurred, every single person, influencer, corporation basically felt like they had to jump on this trend wagon to say, like, we support our Asian brothers and sisters, our Black brothers and sisters, and said this, and then the next day completely forget about it. Or they'll just donate to an organization and done.
So
We're good.
performative.
It's very performative, right? And that's just like, and I'll say this too, like, and this is my opinion, but not Snow's, so I apologize. But even Twitch itself is very performative in that aspect. Like, I've seen so many streamers, so many HQ people on Twitch who basically say we support it, we're going to do all this stuff, and after that moment passes,
Cue the whole crickets.
where the fuck are you? Excuse my
Yeah.
language, but
No,
like
go
it's
for
just
it.
like it's just like they're completely missing and gone. Don't even really address it anymore, and it's not the trending topic anymore. You know what? St. Jude, guys. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're not screw the rest of, like, racism and all that other stuff. Not to say that St. Jude isn't important, but it's just like it's very performative. Like I said, like I get really annoyed, and I'm sure Snow probably does as well when we talk about these and we talk about how critically important it is to bring these minority voices up, and we then forget as soon as next week happens.
Yeah, well, we saw this with Black Lives Matter. Like, this is not just specific to, AAPI month. It's not specific to, addressing Stop Asian Hate. Like last year, during the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement, you saw so much performative actions from companies, performative statements from businesses and brands that say, we stand with our Black community and Black customers. And I think it's great that they make the statement, but where's the follow up? Because I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
follow up matters more. This is not something that should only occur once just because, again, it's hashtag trending. This is something that needs to
Yeah.
be ongoing for the rest of the year and for all the years going forward. But no, that's a really
Mm-hmm.
good point. It's that there is so much just performance activism, and it's not really
Yep.
helping as much as companies think it is. It's better
Yep.
than nothing, but it's still not helping. It's very, for show. So, yeah, they care about one thing. It's the money, right? I mean, that's all businesses in the end. There are some businesses I would hope that are like breaking out of that mold and not just being performative, but by and large, we're seeing performance activism, unfortunately.
Well, it always makes me laugh when a lot of these organizations they say we stand with our diversity, and I'm like, really? Where's the melanin in your executive leadership board?
Mm-hmm.
A single drop of melanin in there. It's
Yep.
all old white folks.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that a lot of companies, especially over the past year, have had to kind of come to terms with and reevaluate internally, because you can say all these things like, oh, we support the Black community, we support the Asian American Pacific Islander community, but is that reflected internally? Because it really doesn't mean anything when you're not really reflecting that diversity and inclusivity within your own company and organization,
Yeah.
right? So I'm interested to see, I think a lot of companies are starting to make change since last year because of that. But I hope, again, it's not just a performative thing.
I hope so. I hope so.
It's hard to tell, right? We'll see. Time will tell. But our next question here is actually from Andu, asking, about a decade ago, I heard it said that handwritten letters mailed to a congressperson or senator are given greater priority by a legislator's staff than messages submitted to them electronically. Is that still the case today?
Um, Sometimes. I mean, I don't know if that rule applies to everyone. Um, it certainly would gain a little bit more attention from the legislative aides that usually sit through these mails all the time. But, you know, like I've had people who can't write that have to type, right? Like they'll have like uh because of access and things like that, who much prefer to do that, and they'll mail it, but they'll make sure to sign, at the end. I mean, that's something that they can do as well. Like, it doesn't have to be. I think the more important, really, thing is like making sure with that in the rule. I said that where it's one page, you're very succinct, you really outlay your points, and you know having that and making it very readable, like you can basically hand this to anyone and someone could be able to follow it. Like, that's critical, because these legislative aides, like, you have to remember, these are like paid interns who get paid, like, pizza money, as I like to call it, to go through these like piles and piles and piles of information. And if you're sitting there, like, going through all of Wikipedia in like 20 pages, they're not good. You know what they'll do is they'll probably push it to the side and be like, I'll read that later, and it'll probably get forgotten. But if it's one page and you're very succinct in your point and everything like that, it's more chance for it to actually be up there. What if it's typed, or what if it's handwritten or not? You could do handwritten as well. It's totally fine. I just feel like you run the issue, especially, I guess, like if your handwriting isn't as great, which, I think I could tell you right now, my handwriting is terrible. Like, if I wrote something and it's like probably Snow's prescription, she'll probably be like, I don't know what to do with this. And then the pharmacist will be like, oh, I totally understand a chicken scratch. But the thing is that, like, for the most part, like, I think like, it's whatever preference you have, but just making sure that the content is the more critical component.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I handwrote a letter.
I don't
Do
remember
people still do
writing
that?
it.
I mean, I feel like people at least type a letter these days. But people, I'm
If I
sure, still
write
do.
something,
Yeah.
I don't. I think my hand will actually physically hurt. Holding a pencil.
No, I hadn't even thought about it, but that's interesting to bring up. Thank you for that insight. We have another question here from Alice asking, what is your opinion on the current hate crime laws and the way they are applied? For example, in the Atlanta shooting case, the shooter didn't receive a hate crime charge. And in the state of Georgia, a hate crime is not something you get arrested for anyway. It's more of a sentence enhancer. From what I understand, they add extra punishment if the murder is actually a hate crime, like after the fact. That's the way I understand it. Does this need to change in order to fight more effectively against hate crime?
So this is a two-part kind of answer, really. Like, legislation is not effective unless it's enforced. That's the first thing I'll say. No matter how great this legislation is, you can write the best legislation possible that addresses everything under the sun, but if there's nothing to enforce it, then it's useless. Second being the fact that I actually agree that we need to address it, because unfortunately the problem is that a lot of these organizations they purposely write these laws to not make hate crime. They basically are very limited window in terms of what they consider hate crime, and um, and as a result, it usually ends up like certain things will just end up not becoming the case due to certain restrictions. I'm not a legal expert on this aspect, so I'm not going to quote on terms of that. So I think so from this perspective, it's good to actually get engaged, like to actually and get engaged in the sense of like read up on the laws itself and figure out where the like backdrops are. And you'll end up finding that a lot of these laws were written probably like 20, 30 years ago and haven't been updated since then. And obviously the concept of hate crime has exponentially like increased in complexity. So I think it's like a lot of places like what they'll do is like, you know, it's good to have like when you hire certain legislators or you hire certain folks like in leadership positions that you get them to start get the dialogue open to get them to start modifying or doing addendum or amendments to these like very old legislations, or it might even be a recent, I don't know, sometimes it could be most recent one. It's just because you have certain people up in the leadership board who don't want to change it. So it all depends on who's like heading the most of these groups, and sometimes it's like it could be the person who really doesn't think that racism exists, unfortunately, and we know that those like groups exist in several parts of the country. So it all depends on how much you can get from a grassroots movement from that perspective.
Thank you for that input. I think it is hard. I think that, a lot of the stuff that was reading is that you're right, is that hate crimes, at least defined back then, it's like you had to explicitly have evidence of hate. Like someone had to paint, like, for example, a Nazi swastika in order for it to be considered, like at the crime scene, for it to be considered a hate crime. They needed that explicit evidence. Otherwise, and I think it's hard for that to be prosecuted now because a lot of people don't explicitly go out of their way to announce their hate before they do it. It's a very complex, what's the word? Complex situation, I guess, for what makes a perpetrator act on hate and racial bias and all that. So, yeah, it's just some good points there. It definitely needs changing. I don't have a solution myself, and I'm not a legal expert or politics expert either, but, it does need to change. Brazoki here has another question here. So Oklahoma just passed a law that makes protesting less safe and could potentially silence many voices, HB 1674. Doesn't this deny a right to peacefully assemble? It reads to me that if anyone blocks a street for 5 minutes, a driver can just hit them and claim quote-unquote self-defense.
I have not read much on that law, so I'm not going to be able to answer that truthfully. So I'm not, and I did not for this poor question, unfortunately. So I'm actually going to abstain from answering that just because I don't want to. You guys know I'm not a very big misinformation person, so I would like to probably take a look into it a little bit more before answering that. So I apologize, but it does sound, from my perspective, from what I hear from the question, it does seem like it's a way to suppress these these protests and things like that. And I think it probably is a result of several other things. And I think that it's those type, especially now that a lot of conservative groups are concerned about voter suppression and all these different things that are coming into light, it wouldn't surprise me that we have these different types of laws and there's legislation being patched. So, but yeah, no, so I probably will unfortunately have to abstain from answering beyond that.
Yeah, I can't really answer it either, but I have seen just kind of here and there the controversy, I guess, around this law is that because on the one side, people are claiming that it basically gives anyone who doesn't like protesters the right to just like drive through them. That's what they're claiming, right? And then on the other side, I mean, if you actually, I want to say I kind of got a glimpse at the actual wording, and it didn't exactly say that. So I know some people might jump to conclusions because, it comes off a certain way, but that's not technically what the law in writing says. So I do want to point that out. Please, again, for misinformation's sake, please read what the law actually says, and don't, assume that this is a pass for people to freely murder without repercussions. That's not what this is.
Yeah.
So, but it is a very controversial, at least from what I've seen, controversial law. And, neither of us can really comment on it because we don't have that expertise nor full knowledge of the laws that are, mentioned here. But I would say it's not a free pass, quote unquote, for people to just drive through protesters. We do have to read the actual wording. But right now, neither of us can really comment on it, I guess, unfortunately.
But if it's an important part, if it's really important, make sure just ding the two of us on Snowy's Discord, and I'll make it a point to take a few minutes to actually read through the legislation before I comment on it. I don't want this to be like, I don't have it, so I'm just gonna skip it. I mean, it's just more like I guess for right now, I don't want to be a source of misinformation if I didn't actually read it. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're both definitely willing to follow up once we actually get more information, for sure. But I think it is something to pay attention to. So we have another question here that came in from Metric Seconds. This is second to the last question we have remaining on Stop Asian Hate. Metric says, in the realm of COVID-19 and the discrimination of Asians worldwide, how badly do you think future Asian immigrants to North America will be affected by AAPI hate?
I don't know. It's hard to say, really. I mean, I think for the near future, we will see certain reticence about it. We'll still see consternation from different groups, because people will always assume that folks immigrating from Asian countries are bringing foreign viruses or foreign sicknesses and everything like that. And also, you have to remember that a lot of these families and groups, they typically will stick with certain communities and things like that, right? So they'll immigrate to a community that's already well integrated, that's already has a couple of population. You'll have some immigration that will happen where people are just moving straight out into a town that they don't know, but that rarely happens. But it does happen. So that being said, I think it's inevitably going to happen, probably in higher incidences for at least the foreseeable future. I think until we get to the point where I'd see maybe a year or two after this pandemic is over, when I say when it's over, when the point where the whole world can actually travel freely without having to worry about COVID, it's then maybe we'll see that. But until then, we're not going to see any of that. I mean, we're already seeing some discrimination against Indians because of what's going on in India right now. And the problem is that it's something that we've been clamoring for in the global health community, is that this is still going to go on until we distribute vaccines to the rest of the world, which we'll get into later. But I'm just saying that this, from the topic's perspective, that we're not going to see it drop anytime soon.
I agree. It's just a unfortunate reality of it. And, even with the hate that we're seeing, some of the violence and incidents that are actually making headlines in media and the news, they're happening within those, pockets of communities where, marginalized people or certain ethnicities are gathering, right? Like in a lot of Chinatowns is where a lot of these incidents of violence are occurring. So even within the, I guess, safety or familiarity of these cultures and groups coming together within these neighborhoods, that doesn't prevent them from facing this violence. That doesn't, keep them safe, unfortunately. And I think the reality is that, unfortunately, unless we all come together, realize and acknowledge what's going on, and do our best to learn, to be better and do better, and to spread, that message of being better and doing better to people within our own personal circles, that until that happens, we're really not going to see any sort of necessarily, safe space from this kind of hate. That said, I don't want to spread panic and say that we should all be paranoid from here on out, right? But there is this sort of hypervigilance within the Asian American community right now, that we do get more wary when we go out, and it's not because we want to, it's just the reality
Yeah,
of it. And
right.
unfortunately, we just need that education. We need people to talk about this, to work together towards solutions.
Absolutely.
So, very good point. This is actually our last Stop Asian Hate related question, also from Metric, asking, would implementing changes to school curriculums to introduce younger minds to other cultures help with curbing AAPI hate? What kind of changes do you think would help?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I would say like I'm a product really like and not to sound like I'm above anyone, but like my school, one of the things I always took away from the fact was that like our schools made it a point like from preschool up through like high school to introduce different cultures, world history and things like that. And it made me a better person, like to kind of like understand everything. Um, and unfortunately like that you don't have that type, like especially if you're in a school area or a district area where it's like 90% white and 10% minority. That's a difficult thing. But I think curriculum wise we could definitely start to introduce like a focus much more on cultural sensitivity, or do world history being a much more thing, and also like re-looking at a lot of how we teach history in general, like and our civics and things like that, because there's so many things like that we cover in even just our own national history that we kind of leave out of the out of the textbooks. One of the many things that I remembered being like the big case right here, and let me see if I can pull it up right here, was when I was watching the HBO series Watchmen, and then there was like this event that was they were talking about at the beginning. It was like the Black Wall Street crisis situation, and people were like, oh my god, like this is such a crazy fictional event and blah blah blah. And people had to come out and say like, no, this actually happened in our history. This actually happened where like hundreds of Black Americans were murdered, and it was just like it was such a shock to like the community in general, like that this was like something that was not mainstream. But it was because if you look at it, like no one ever was taught that. We're always talking about Christopher Columbus, Lois and Clark, and all these other different things. And we could you could talk about every other aspects of the American history, but when you talk about like actual like minorities or like how we had to deal with that, like the only thing we were taught were maybe like the Chinese built the railroads, blacks were slaves, Harriet Tubman. Like it was very like limited in terms of like what our exposure was. And I think that if in general if we're going to be talking about history in general, we need to be much more inclusive of the ideas that the fact that the United States itself was not the best country for a long time. We were a very ugly young country for a while, and a lot of textbooks tend to very gloss over that. They're just like, no, America the Great. We were always like we were bountiful and we were about freedom. And I'm like, to a few people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just something we just need to really reevaluate when we look at that. Like it's not until like you're in college and you're doing like history of Black Americans that you really get into that. Like that's just you don't get that type of exposure much until later.
Yeah, I think having the basic education, because
Ooh,
I
good
think
point.
especially in terms of the context of the anti-Asian hate that's happening right now, a lot of it does stem from the fact that people didn't know just how much Asian Americans are part of American history. We've been here for going on 200 years and people still don't realize, right? And I think a lot of the racism and racist views that come out that we're seeing a lot, now is because people just grew up thinking, Asians and Asian Americans were not part of American history. And that as a
Yeah.
result, that leads to, the perpetual foreigner and the othering that we're constantly facing. So I do agree that just changing the basic like K-12 education, especially in terms of US history and American history, to include talking about Asian American history, because If you watch that PBS documentary Asian Americans, you will see there's so much. Like, I can't even begin to describe. There is so much that was left out. And you
Mhm.
really need to like watch those documentaries. They're so well done, and there's a lot that was omitted in that history. Like, they did touch on, well, at least when I was in school, they did touch on, Chinese people building the Transcontinental Railroad. And then they briefly touched on the fact that Japanese and Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II because of a fear
Yeah.
of espionage, a fear of spying for the enemy, Even though
Yeah.
a lot of those, the overwhelming majority of people that were imprisoned in those in those camps were actually born and raised in the U.S. Like, it's really messed up history, and the extent to which that happened and the fallout, the consequences, the repercussions, all of that, that gets glossed over right now in terms of, if they do
Mhm.
mention it, it's like a footnote.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to change. So I think basic K-12 education overhaul to include Asian American history will make a massive difference.
Mhm.
So that was a very good question. Yeah, young minds soak up information like a sponge. Wowzers is right. And it does take just having that basis, makes a world of difference, especially when children grow up, right? And they've learned that, Asians are a part of history in the U.S., that we are Americans, we're not some people that have never been here before. And we're, it's frustrating because it's not something that can change overnight,
Mhm.
right? So, but yeah, that concludes our Stop Asian Hate questions. So we have a lot of COVID questions. I hope you're ready, Dr. Neuro.
I know, 90% from batch. I already know. Excuse me.
But I do want to say thank you to everybody who did submit questions revolving around Stop Asian Hate. If you're all curious, I'm Chinese American, Dr. Neuro.
Chinese American.
And we definitely appreciate people wanting to learn about our experiences and what we go through. Again, don't stop educating yourself. Don't stop learning. And please keep supporting the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. Not just this month
Mhm.
for AAPI Heritage Month, but for all year and onward. So,
Mhm.
our first question. So, again, we have a lot here, and I hope you're all excited to learn. But the first question here comes from Batch. So Batch asked, what impact do you expect lockdowns and the pandemic itself to have on the overall mental health of the population in the near future?
Um, so there's been several studies regarding lockdowns and mental health in general. Like, and I think people pretty much knew this, but I'll reiterate my discussion from last time. Like, I and I think most of us in the public health domain are against the idea of lockdowns. Like that should be, but that's not to say that it doesn't work when it's like an absolute crisis situation, like in India right now. But in situations where like we're in the United States where there is an upsurge in cases, we should be looking at different ways to bypass it or to like make sure that we are not getting to the point where we need a lockdown. So we're absolutely against it. So I'm going to preface that before I kind of go on to reiterate from last time. Now, regarding mental health and everything like that, absolutely. It's like it should like if you're telling someone to stay home all the time, not have any human exposure, limit like where they can go in and go out, it does take a downturn for it, the mental health of most people. Just think about how incarcerated people feel now. Um, but the idea beyond that is just in general, like we have to think about, I think we're gonna see like a lot of you know mental health like situations that will pop up as a result of lockdowns and just in general. I think just in pandemic in general, right? Like we have lived almost like purely through Zoom calls and FaceTime. And it's one of those things that like we're trying to, and it's part of the reasons why we're updating guidances around masks and we're updating things when we're getting more data about vaccines is because we realize that people are starting to lose hope as people are starting to lose like like that kind of like, I guess, luster to do things. And there's actually like an article that they talk about that languished feeling where you're feeling like just bleh because of the pandemic. And part of it is just making sure that we address that kind of aspect moving forward. And this is not even talking about these are healthy individuals, mentally healthy individuals going into the pandemic, but people who are already like suffering from anxiety, depression, and all this other stuff. It just got exacerbated by this as well. So I think we have a lot of digging up to do once this pandemic is over, but it certainly made it worse. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are. I'm seeing comments in chat. People are saying, they're sharing how their mental health has suffered because of the pandemic, and even for those
Yeah.
of us that were already, like you said, mostly mentally sound and not necessarily struggling, and kind of, a lot of us, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember people like memes going around of people like, oh, I'm already introverted. This is normal for me to stay in, right? But even people who claimed that initially are feeling the effects now because, I
Yeah.
don't think people are meant to necessarily be locked down indoors all the time, especially for this long.
No, absolutely not. I mean, like there was even a study that was done recently, like not recently, it was like a while ago about single people, people who were in the dating scene that basically that whole lifestyle was gone. It was just swept away after the pandemic hit because they couldn't date anymore. You couldn't go to a stranger's house or you couldn't go and have dinner with someone outside. Like that lifestyle was completely gone. And I think a lot of people mentally just kind of like they grew more, anxious and grew more, depressed over time as a result of it. Um, like I said, that being said, lockdowns, it had to have happened on certain times within the history of this pandemic. Whether if you know, it did save lives, but in terms of like some of the repercussions, there's a bit of a double-edged sword behind it. And this is the reason why we should not implement that measure until we absolutely necessarily need to. So it's kind of like that. It's kind of the place where I'm at right now with that.
Yeah, and I think especially because the U.S. doesn't really have a great track record of supporting people who need mental help, right?
Yeah.
And now, add on top of that, the repercussions of, a pandemic with lockdowns, extended lockdowns that have happened. And there's
Mhm.
all this, pent up frustration and anger and all these negative feelings that people have to somehow deal with. And we don't have these support systems in place. We don't have the infrastructures in place to help give these resources to people who need them, And I know there's a lot of studies probably coming out of this, but I feel like it'll be interesting to see because we're not done. Even when the pandemic is over, officially, we're not done with the pandemic. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Especially mentally. That is something we all globally, but especially in the US, are gonna have to deal with, whether we like
Yep.
it or not. So very good points there. This is a kind of a follow up question from Batch relating to that. Do you think journalists should have? Oh, did I do the right one? I think I skipped it. Whoops. Well, there was a follow up question about mental health. I actually skipped it. It's gone now. No.
We'll never know what you asked.
I
No,
forgot. It
just
was
kidding.
something about mental health, and I totally. I'm sorry, Batch. Maybe I should pull it up. Give me a second. Well, let's go ahead and answer this question that's on the screen.
Sure.
Do you think journalists should have any sort of role in impacting how medicine is practiced?
So I have thoughts about this. I mean, like, I think journalism, like good scientific journalism, there's a lot that I know of. I could list a couple that I know that I really like Helen Branswell, Apurva Mandavali, like from New York Times. Like, there are some really amazing ones out there who really understand the science, who really do try to do good by like making sure that they get the great like inputs and make sure that they communicate things to the best of their ability. And sometimes they get flack for it too, but um I think it's critical that you do have journalists out there because you want them to elucidate some of the weaknesses and also just in general some of the the way the medicine is practiced right now isn't exactly the best in the United States either. Like we still have certain models that are very antiquated. We still have certain ways that medicine is practiced where it doesn't really benefit the you know the economically disadvantaged groups and things like that. So it's good that we have journalists to point that out, and we also need to make sure that there's a way that we bridge how for folks a lot of times when people don't. If you're never in the hospital, if you're a healthy individual, chances are you're not going to be aware of just how in general, like how a hospital functions or what happens when you get to an emergency room and all this stuff. Like even like health insurance is a very daunting thing for a lot of folks. So I think there is definitely room, by sure, for having journalism involved, in aspects of a policy perspective. And information sharing, like absolutely. They will never obviously be in the actual operating room or anything like that. That's obviously or dealing with direct patient care, but it's critically important to know where let's say if several patients were abused by one specific physician, we would absolutely need to know that because sometimes like they will not the system doesn't allow for it or they don't talk about it, and having them talk to a journalist to bring light in the situation is absolutely critical. So absolutely, from that perspective, we need to have journalism side by side with medicine. And I think for the most part, in the COVID pandemic, we actually have pretty decent ones. There's like a few, I would count on my one hand, journalists out there who were complete shitbags. That's me putting it lightly. But these were people who were outside of their scope, who didn't really understand the actual epidemiology or the infectious disease standpoint, were commenting and doing stuff. The biggest one I can tell you right now is that you should avoid is Alex Berenson. He's like he used to be a New York Times reporter, but now he's like one of the biggest anti-vaxxers out there, and he just continuously pulls like bullshit out of his bag and fights with all the doctors online. Like, or we bought each other, by the way, but like there are bad apples, it's certainly by sure, but I don't think it's unfair for us to like blame the journalist community for sure. There are really good ones out there. And if you guys ever need a list of who to look up for, I'm happy to do so. There's a lot that are great out there.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think especially when it comes to journalism in general, when people think journalism, their first, impression is probably sensationalism, right? And I'm sure that applies a lot to reporting on what's happening with COVID and just from the medical industry in general, right? Is that something that, we should, I guess, as regular consumers, be wary of, headlines we read about COVID these days, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is that you can always like, double check on it. Like if it sounds way too sensational, like most people can tell if it sounds way too sensational, like, and most of the good ones I know typically try to avoid it. Sometimes they'll flub a little bit, but in general, like, they're pretty decent about it.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Our next question. So it turns out I thought there was a follow-up question to the mental health question, but there's not, so we're on track. Our next question here is from Nintendo Geek. And if I'm not mistaken, Nintendo Geek, she did report to us that she had an allergic reaction. So this is her question, asking, what are some of the allergic reactions from the vaccine? And should you get the second dose if you have an allergic reaction to the first one?
So allergic type of allergic reactions. I mean, they usually form in like rash. You'll typically get certain like what we call COVID arm, the vaccine arm, which is like reddening of it. In terms of like if allergic reactions, really it depends on the severity of the allergic reaction. If it gets to the point where it's like an anaphylaxis like reaction, what we call it, like where it's like very severe, like you have to go to if you are hospitalized as a result of it, by far you definitely should not take it. And those usually actually occur pretty quickly. It's not like if you were to take it and 14 days later you're playing video games and it hits you. It doesn't do that. It happens within that time. And actually most people who do get the vaccine, it's the reason why they make you wait 15 minutes, or for I guess most sites, they'll make you wait for observation for a certain amount of time because they want to check to see if there's something of a situation that happens as a result of it. But it does happen like sometimes like within a 12-hour, 24-hour window. I actually talked to someone within my own stream community that did that as well. And they had a reddening on the ear as well, a rash, and it went away. Like it wasn't painful. It didn't, there was nothing that, wasn't like blood or pus was like gushing out of it. And I just made sure that I was like, well, if you see something like that happen, make sure you go to the vaccine adverse events reporting system that's on CDC and report it. Make sure you report that because that's part of the whole good thing about our system is that we have these systems in place so that you can report it. And there's also even like a CDC phone app as well. Like they think most people who got vaccinated, they were encouraged to download the app and do a weekly check-in. I still am doing a check-in to this day right now where they say, hey, is there any side effects? Are there any issues? Like, did you need to go to a hospital? These are all critical, important data points that most people should be providing for that purpose. But to answer your question, really, like, unless if it's something that like puts you into a hospital or where you really feel like you needed to go to a hospital, it's nothing to worry about. And especially if you've recovered from it, it's not a big deal. Get a second shot, but make sure you let the person know when you're getting it that, hey, I did have, a bit of an allergic reaction, describe it. And they'll know and they'll make sure, like, oh, okay, so we might need to observe you for a little longer, or we might want to encourage you to see a doctor. They'll have doctors on site for that reason. So there are different ways you can absolutely go about it. So.
Yeah, I actually just recently, like this past weekend, got my second shot, and Dr. Neuro is right. The nurse administering your shot will ask you if you had a reaction to your first dose, and to just tell them in detail what happened. And for me, it was a sore arm the first time. Second time this past weekend, I had a low grade fever, and I had fatigue and a sore arm. That's all I had. So, it does happen. And my question, I guess, is, for people who do have a severe allergic reaction to the first dose, what is their solution? Like, what are they supposed to do? Because they obviously can't get the second dose.
I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. They'll still have the first dose in the system. They would just have to be more careful in this case. But it's again, like getting one dose versus two doses, assuming if you get the two-dose vaccine, you still confer some sort of protection immunity. So it's not the end of the world. It's not going to be like 100%. But, it would just mean that like when you are engaging activities or things like that, take that as a part of a risk factor when you're going out. So instead of like, let's say, I'm putting this in terms of like a RPG perspective, like like if you instead of like having a full suit of armor, you just have a shield. Like that's essentially what I would equate to, like just having one shot. And so, it just means that you just gotta be a little more careful. But it doesn't mean you're completely without protection. Like that's not ever the case here. But yeah, absolutely. Like, don't fret too much if you cannot get the second dose. In fact, it's important that you definitely don't take the second dose if you had a very severe side effect from that as a result of it. And also, like, if you do know that, like, definitely volunteer if you can. Like, there are several places that look for people who do have severe side effects to get that type of data point. Provide that. Like, like, make sure you can volunteer for those because it's important that we get that data point to understand those side effects. But those are, again, very, very rare. I want to make sure to communicate that to people that these like very like small like these severe side effects, the anaphylaxis, are so very rare that like chances of you getting are zilch to none. So don't stress too much about it. But it does exist out there. So
Very good. So our next question here, also relating to vaccines, comes from Dawn. Dawn asked, is there any difference in content between the first and the second dose, whether it be for Pfizer or Moderna? Are both doses made up of the same contents, or they're just given at separate times? Like, is that basically it? Why is there a waiting period between the first and second dose?
So there is no difference in terms of like the ingredients between the first and second dose. If they give you like Pfizer, Moderna, they shouldn't be mixing it anyways, but not the end of the world if you do, but they're all the same ingredients for both back and forth. And so in terms of like why you have to wait for that, because there is a time period that you essentially need to like allow your immune system to really prime and get ready to produce like certain amount of antibodies to make sure that it is essentially ready. So when I talk about the two shots, I usually think about it this way. It's like you give your immune system one shot, the first shot, it's like, okay, here's a crash, dummy course for coronavirus. All right, immune system, I need you to study this. I need you to buckle down and study like your life depended on it. I'm going to come back in 2 weeks and I'm going to test you on it.
Pop quiz.
So, pop quiz, right? So your immune system's sitting there sweating and going like, ah, shit, I got to study for this, and my parents are going to ground me for life if I don't study it. So they're studying and everything, and then 2 weeks comes down the line that your body's already producing antibodies, it's already doing all the stuff to prepare for it, and you get your second shot. And when you get your second shot, it's why you get those side effects. You get a lot of the things that people assume were associated with side effects, is because at that second point right there, your body's just like, yo, it's go time, I'm gonna beat the snot out of this. And so when you get that second shot and you produce those spike proteins, your immune system's ready to go. It's ready to attack, and it's ready to inflame. It's ready to do its thing. And that's why usually within the first 48-hour time period, you feel like that flu-like symptoms for like, really robust, healthy immune systems. But that being said, if you don't see side effects, don't stress out about it. Doesn't mean that you have a crappy immune system. Sometimes just some people don't get that. So, but that is just essentially what it is.
Yeah, and everybody's different because I had pretty mild side effects. Diz had nothing except fatigue. He didn't have a fever or anything. And I know Diz's mother had literally nothing on her second dose. So everybody is different, and I don't think there's any predictability on why some people get side effects and why some people don't, correct?
No, there's not really. I mean, like the thing is that your immune system is like, which I know one of Batch's question down the line. It's very complicated. Like, you can ask any of the medical students and the doctors that are in my Discord channel. I could tell you right now, if you say adaptive immune system, they would just like cower in fear because it's like such a difficult course, because of like how complicated it is. So, you know, a clear reason why we see that. But once again, like it could even mean sometimes, and I've seen some people where they get severe side effects on the first shot, and it comes to find out that they actually had COVID ages ago, but it was an asymptomatic case. And because of that, their body has already produced the antibodies. It's already got their crash course book. So that first shot to them was like, oh, okay, we're doing this again, and it'll have that type of reaction. Sometimes that could be the case, but again, there's various reasons why, but I think right in general, like if you could take both doses, take both doses.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. My younger brother, he actually had COVID sometime late last year. I can't remember. And of course, he recovered. It might have been earlier this year, but he just got his first vaccine dose. I think it was last week or the week before. But he told me that he had severe side effects to the first dose. Like he had fever, the whole thing, because he had COVID before, and he had like body chills. He couldn't sleep. Like it was just the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
So it does make a difference if you apparently already have some of those antibodies in your system. But he did have COVID before. He fully recovered from it. Then he got the first dose of the vaccine. He's still waiting for the second dose. But he said it was kind of rough and he wasn't expecting that. So,
Yeah,
everybody's body is different. They're complex.
different. It's different. But doesn't mean that your immune system is better than the other if you have a reaction or someone doesn't. So, don't think that. I
Yeah,
definitely don't want people to think that.
for sure. So this is our last question before we take a 5-minute break. So we'll dive into that. But this is actually a question from me, which I know there's been
Okay.
developments about this since. So we're going to, of course, talk about that. But my question when I submitted this 2 weeks ago was, what's the reason that vaccines are for adults 16 and over, and why not children?
So this is more of a design of just how we do clinical trials and things like that. And also just in general, like for children, their immune system is very much more, it's a lot more different, right? Because they're still maturing and they're still essentially building up their immunity and stuff like that. So for us to engage in a lot of clinical trials, we usually structure it in a way where we're testing the elderly adults first, and then we move down. And then we look at other different groups of populations. We have, for when we do clinical trials, it's best for us to compare apples to apples. So we want to make sure that we're comparing adults 16 and above, and then adults 16 and above, and that we want to make sure that, from a physiological standpoint and from a clinical standpoint, that they're about equal comparison. It doesn't make sense if we're, comparing a very healthy 15-year-old to a 60-year-old, right? Absolutely nonsense in terms of comparing the two. Like, one probably is sitting here chugging Mountain Dew and eating Doritos and playing Fortnite 16 hours a day and can still go and do a mile run, while you have 60-year-old grandma who's probably like got arthritis, has like all these conditions, and probably is not able to go out and do runs. They're very different in terms of that. So you want to make sure that these groupings and cohorts are absolutely within the same right comparison. That being said, it is for us, like in a way, it makes it also easier and faster for us to do examination of these vaccine efficacy when we do certain groups as well, and we parse it down and we address it bit by bit by bit. So right now, obviously, we just saw FDA just approved for 12 to 15-year-olds for the Pfizer vaccine, when Moderna is going to be coming pretty soon as well. And we're going to be, and they're already, I think I would foresee, like within probably September timeframe, we'll probably see like, the 6 to 12. And we're just going to keep going down from that perspective. And so it's, it's important for us to make sure we have a controlled, regimented study for different age groups. And that's just the way it happens.
Okay. Very interesting. We actually have kind of a related question. This was a new question that was asked since our first part. This is actually from Andu. Andu asked, I read that Pfizer is seeking emergency approval, which they've already granted since this question was submitted, for vaccinating children ages 12 to 15, and eventually would like to seek emergency approval to vaccinate ages 2 plus. I've heard that children generally spread coronavirus less easily than adults. Is that true? If it is true, how does vaccination of children differ from vaccination of adults in terms of how it affects transmission of the virus at the community level?
That's a good question. So in general, like I'm going to stand by my first standing here is that I believe all children should be vaccinated with this COVID vaccine. So that's the first thing I want to make sure to say that. Now, the reason why is because when we look at this from a community or even a population perspective, that yes, they're less likely to transmit or less spread or anything of that sort, but that doesn't mean it's zero. So there's a chance that could happen. So let's take it out from a population perspective. If every child has a 1% chance of spreading it, you have 1% of chances of that child bringing it to home. And let's say if the family is not vaccinated, or in this case, like they are vaccinated, but they happen to get it, like there's a chance that you can continuously promote that transmission down the line. And for us, it's a matter of addressing that as well. And from that perspective, and also for children who do get it, like the thing is that for them, they are still susceptible to the virus itself. And even if they are not, most of them are quote unquote asymptomatic, we've seen a lot of cases where they actually have inflammatory syndromes that have persisted throughout the childhood, for the year and things like that. And, we've seen a lot of what we consider long COVID effects as well for children. So it's not to say that like, even if they weren't hospitalized and everything like that, we're essentially ruining a lot of their like quality of life as a result of even just getting it. And so we have to think much more in perspective of the fact that like even having one child, and I made a snarky post about this last night on Twitter. I was like, even having one child fatality as a result of COVID is too much. Like this is something that's preventable. We have the tools out there. So why shouldn't we vaccinate a child, even one child, from that reason? And so from even if we look at it from a community perspective, a community is not like community transmission and transmission in general are not static. They're dynamic. They're very variable, and people move around. People are going to do things. People are going to go on vacation. Children are going to do things. I mean, children, like, have you ever seen a child sit still for more than 5 minutes? No, fam. They're gonna want to go out and play. They're gonna want to hang out with friends. They're gonna want to go out and talk to other adults and things like that. Like this is just something like we just have to take into account for the fact from like that aspect that we have to like address the fact that we do still need to vaccinate children. Absolutely. We still need to vaccinate children, even if it is a low chance, even if it is like low percentage and everything like that. I mean, like it doesn't matter. Like we have to assume that we know that they are still susceptible to it. We know that they're susceptible to it. We know that they can die from it. We know that they can like, they can have long COVID effects. So all of these things right there, if we apply it from the perspective of 1% of children who contract coronavirus and they get severely sick, they can't breathe as well as they used to. Like, isn't that a tragedy right there? Like you're telling me that 100 kids have to suffer because we decided not to vaccinate them because we're playing the whole transmission numbers game. So again, I mean, like if anyone's going to tell you here that, oh, well, children are less likely, no. Like, and even like if we look at it from a perspective, and here's another like there was a very heartbreaking article that I read the other day, or like a few weeks ago from the Atlantic, where it was talking about children that were orphaned because of COVID. And some of those cases, children brought COVID home. The parents weren't protected, the parents were not vaccinated. So we don't think about it from that perspective that like if a child brings that home and it kills their parents, what does that do to that poor child? That child becomes a product of, like the adoption, like, and we already know that there's a lot of problems with there, but it's like, like they're become orphans because of this disease. I think it was like an astonishing number too, and I have to dig it up. I don't have the numbers on that, but so when people tell me once again that children should not be vaccinated, I pull that article up every time. I'm like, tell that to all these children that should not be vaccinated, that that your mom and dad died because this virus hit them, and tell me that's a different story. So absolutely, children should be vaccinated, hands down, no questions.
Thank you for that. That is really sad. I can't even imagine because it's not only, have they lost one or more parents, how the health support for those children, there's probably not there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, goodness. We are going to take a quick break. I know that was a sad note to take a break on, but don't go away though. This is just gonna be like a 5-minute break. But I love seeing people commenting in chat and sharing their experiences. We are gonna be back in about 5-ish minutes, give or take. But continue to join in the discussions. There is that article right there that Dr. Neuro was just talking about. But we still have quite a few questions to cover, so feel free to stick around, but let's all take a quick stretch break because we should stretch. It's been about an hour and a half since we started talking. So I'll see you all in a few minutes. Thank you all for hanging out today.
Yep, yep.
All right, we're back. All right. We're all back.
Yay.
Yay. I hope you all took a break. Thanks for sticking around. Thank you all for the welcome backs. All right. So, for anyone just now joining in the middle of this, if you're wondering what's going on, I have the absolute honor to sit here and chat with Dr. Neurofourier, who will introduce himself and let you know who he is, where to find him, and what he's all about. Take it away.
Sure. I am Neurofourier, or you can call me Dr. Neurofourier, Dr. Neuro, or just Neuro. Neuro works the best. I am an infectious disease specialist that works within the U.S. State Department. I focus particularly on humanitarian crisis settings or just crisis settings in general within all the rest of the world. I've worked in many areas, but right now I focus on a lot of science communication as well on Twitch and Twitter. I don't stream as often as I used to, but right now Twitter has been my main platform. You can find me on there all the time, and I usually try to provide up-to-date news, debunking misinformation, and also just in general having very long threads explaining very complicated subjects on just in general how we're dealing with COVID, the vaccine, the research, and just in general other stuff as well, because there are other infectious diseases out there that's not COVID, believe it or not. So that's it. And you can find me mostly everywhere with this handle.
Sweet, sweet. My mods will drop Dr. Neurofourier's links in chat, specifically for Twitch and Twitter, so please follow if you have an account on either platform. All right, so we're still answering leftover questions from part 1, which we did 2 weeks ago, for anyone curious. And basically, we collected questions from the community about COVID-19, the vaccines, the pandemic, just anything that people had concerns or were curious about or whatever. And we're going through those now. So that said, as we're discussing and as we're just chatting and things, if you think of something that a question or, what about this or what about that arises out of what we're talking about, please don't hesitate to mention it in chat. Both of us are reading chat, and Dr. Neuro will go into more detail if there's something that's unclear or if there's something you just want to know about. So please don't hesitate. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the next question here from Brazoki. Is it possible that the vaccine will be required for certain jobs and colleges?
Colleges for sure. They already kind of do that already, right? Like they always ask you, you should have certain vaccinations pretty much ready. Schools as well, actually, I think for the most part, they don't require certain ones like flu or anything like that. They highly recommend it. But certain vaccinations, for sure, you're definitely supposed to have. And I definitely think for COVID, they definitely will be requiring that as well. So once these start rolling out on any sort of basis. So, but again, that depends on which school, depends on state and things like that. So not the end of the world if your school doesn't require it, but it's just one of those you have to be cautious about as well. So I can't speak for all the colleges and all schools, but I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a requirement.
What about for jobs? Because can they do that for jobs? Require vaccines?
Depends on the type of job. For example, if you are a caretaker in a nursing home, yeah, you damn well better hope that it's a requirement because you're essentially going into a group congregate setting with a bunch of very vulnerable people. But in terms of I am seeing some of the stuff regarding chit-chat and things. It might vary from other countries. It might even vary sometimes by state and by county here in the United States. For the majority of the part, though, many of them do require some sort of record of vaccination and everything like that before you go to school. You have to have the bare minimum. You have to have the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. You have to have certain ones. You have to have certain ones that before you even get into a school for that reason. So it is a requirement. But again, for job wise, it depends on your job. Sometimes if you're going into a banking job, they probably won't require it. But but if you're working in a hospital or any health settings, damn well better hope that you get that, because if something happens and you become infected with something that is highly infectious, that's a liability for the hospital. So
Yeah, I remember being required to give my vaccination records for university.
yeah.
But I mean, since then I've moved around, and I think my parents lost my vaccination card, so I don't know how I'm supposed to like get that information. Is there somewhere I
You
could
should
access it?
You should be able to go to your if you just go to your doctor, like if you have like a primary healthcare physician and just ask them, they usually what they'll do is like there's like a network database that they can go and grab that out of. It's not an issue. And Odious, who's in chat right now, he's like the health data person as well. He could probably speak into it as well. He's part of my community. But yeah, like that's like a data that you can ask, or what you could do as well. You could go to your state health agencies as well and request that type of data. Because they'll try to have that on record, but it depends on where you're at, and things like that. So also thanks for the raid.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, welcome. Um, okay, that's good to know. Very good to know.
Mhm.
Cool. So, moving on to more vaccine questions. There's a lot of questions about vaccines. So Brazoki asks, are there other essential vaccines that have slowed down due to anti-vaccine movements and beliefs? Are there diseases that could be coming back soon?
Um, I mean, I think we had like an outbreak of measles at one point because there was like a huge like anti-vax community that happened. So yeah, I mean, like by all means, like there's not many like viruses out there that have been completely eliminated. Like uh, that's just the reality of it. Like there's going to be some rare situations where they are still there. There's like barely any vaccines that produce what we call sterilizing immunity, which actually completely eliminates the virus transmission completely. Like there's very rare like situations that happen. So the idea of like it essentially in this case, like of it coming back, absolutely. Sorry, I had lost my train of thought there. It's been a long day. But yes, viruses can come back, obviously, from like if there is like a stop in like how we do vaccinations and things like that. And a lot of anti-vaccination like movements are hoping for that type of like momentum to really kind of push for these type of things. Like they're relentless. They'll keep going. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. And smallpox, in labs, yeah, but I mean, like, but yeah, there's many, unfortunately, that has happened over many different groups as well. Like, and the thing is that they also happen like in several country groups as well. So I wouldn't be surprised. So
There's a good point made in chat here saying that's one of the major problems in first generation immigrant groups is that they're often vulnerable to anti-vaxxer propaganda.
yep.
Yeah, so that's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, a lot of immigrant groups are very wary of Western medicine sometimes, and you'll end up seeing a lot of folks who, and also just in general, the approachability of like medicine in general, it's not exactly cheap. So you have a lot of immigrant communities who are victims to that, and they'll be like, "Well, why pay $600 for this when I could pay $20 for this root or this herb that can cure me of this?" And it tends to be a very powerful mechanism for that aspect.
very good points. So this moves on. We have quite a few questions on vaccines, but we have one here from Chicken Nugget asking, how can we be sure that there are no long-term negative effects of the vaccines?
A great question. And it's actually a very common one that a lot of people who are hesitant to take the vaccine. I'll tell you right now that every single big hit vaccine, like polio, measles, mumps, and rubella, and like even the tuberculosis, which has not been that effective, but it works and everything, all these other ones that have been in history, we've pretty much within the first few months of it being administered, we basically were able to identify all possible effects or in this case side effects of any kind that could ever happen within its life cycle within there. And so as a result, like for us, like if you were concerned about long-term effects of this vaccine, if we haven't found out by now, I can guarantee you for the most part that you're probably not going to see something in the long run from there for the most part. So again, like don't stress out about the long-term effects. If you look at the actual technology of it itself, especially for the mRNA ones, like it's meant to literally go in there, do its job, and it's done. Like it disappears from your system afterwards. Like it does not stick around your body for long. It basically trains your immune system and keeps your immune system up and tight and ready to go. And that's it. Like it's actually one of the coolest technologies that's out there. That I'm really like it's really cool. Like I was actually telling my husband, I was just like, we're actually taking part in history by taking this vaccine. Like it's kind of like what people when they were taking the polio vaccine and didn't realize it, but we're actually taking part in like huge medical history here by taking this vaccine. Like Key and I were actually like wanting to get a vial of the vaccine that we got. We're like, this is our piece of history, but we don't get that. So, but yeah, absolutely. Like chances of you actually finding out long-term effects of it, you would know within the first few weeks of anything, of all the full gamut of side effects. And the fact that we have like been very meticulously monitoring everyone from day one from taking this vaccine, and I mean meticulously. Like remember, J&J, we paused for just 6 cases, or like even not even at like double, like it was, I think it was like double the numbers, but it was still like 14 cases or something like that of that specific thrombotic event. That tells you how like much of a microscope these vaccines are under. So I wouldn't stress out too much about that.
Yeah, I think people that kind of relates to that fear that people are like, oh, this vaccine was developed so quickly, and so that there's a lot of
Hmm.
distrust, right? Because they think it shouldn't take, it shouldn't be that fast, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know if we address that question in the
We
last time
addressed
or
it
did
last
we?
time, but if you want to give a brief overview, just to clarify,
Yeah.
like, why the vaccine was developed so quickly.
So we had one of the biggest things was like for this one, we injected a ton of funding. So basically, a lot of these companies were able to do majority of the stuff that they did without risk. So they were able to get everything that they could with tons and tons of money. Like I mean, we threw every month. Like if it had a dollar sign, we threw it at these companies to make it. The second being the fact that we were very good. We were very creative on ways of staggering out our scheduling of how we were doing, clinical trials, and we were doing like regulation reviews and all sort of stuff. We didn't skip any steps. We were just much more creative on our timing because we basically had every manpower going into it to fix that problem. The third being the fact that this is the most important critical point is the fact that we had easy ways of recruiting for clinical trials. This is important because this is actually the part that takes a lot of time for any clinical trial is getting people involved, right? Because you have to recruit a lot of people for that, to actually do clinical trials. Like we had thousands of people to do these trials because guess what? COVID was everywhere. You could literally close your eyes, point at a map, and you could find a hot spot or find somewhere where that's within like certain mile radius that's going to offer you, a bountiful amount of like people to like get involved and participate in these vaccine trials. And that was like one of the biggest factors, the biggest successes in terms of that is that we literally had no limits in terms of like that aspect. And I usually like for most like vaccine development, like, and I'll say for example, the Ebola one, for example, it took a while for them to get it because it took that long to get that many participants involved in it. I mean, because Ebola was only localized in certain areas. So going around for the rest of the world was like not prudent as a result of it. And so, yeah, money, you had creative like scheduling, and you had the amount of like, and also you have like bountiful amount of clinical trial participants. Those basically allow for us. And also, really, like the mRNA technology wasn't that brand spanking new. That technology has actually been around for a good several decades already. I'm not going to say it was like it's like something that just got whipped out instantly, but it was definitely already there. We basically took it and tweaked it for the purposes of this vaccine, and so there wasn't a lot of headway for that. And also, when we got the full SARS-CoV-2 genomic sequence, the whole like template, like the genome, like the data for it, early January. China sequenced everything. The scientists from China did it, and he basically left it out to the rest of the world. And it was so quick. Like everyone snatched that data up and just started work immediately. Like it was a race. Because I mean, like I guess like from a selfish perspective of like a organization, you kind of want to be like the one that's like, hey, we were the organization that saved the world with this vaccine. And I can tell you a lot of folks over at Pfizer were like that too. They were just like, "Nah, fam, we're gonna get right on this." And so, it's kind of a cool aspects of that. So nothing was skipped, nothing was rushed. In fact, everything is even more scrutinized than ever. Like if you look at if and you guys can actually attend any of the like ACIP meetings, which is where like all the doctors are on there just scrutinizing all the presentation and data. They just sit there and they nitpick everything. And you can watch it. It's alive. And if plug to myself, I'll be live tweeting the ACIP meeting tomorrow for Pfizer when they talk about the 12 to 15-year-olds. And you will see it's open to the public. You can watch every single bit of data that they scrutinize. They are not easy on anyone. There is no preferences. They sit there and they will rip you apart. And that just tells you just how much scrutiny goes into every single one of these vaccines that are being developed. Even if they are quote unquote being rushed, which they're not, like they still hit a stopping point, which is the review and safety quality board. Like they will not let it go. Like there's no way that they would allow it. And like if there is something that somehow slips by, which maybe a mistake would happen. I'm not saying that will never happen. I can guarantee you that most of those organizations, even the ones who are producing it, will stop it immediately. That's not something that they want. That's not bad press that they want to deal with right there. So, but yeah, that's just something to think about.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. So again, nothing was skipped, it's just that everything kind of came together because of the urgency of what was happening. And everybody was
Absolutely.
throwing resources, throwing everything they could at it, and I think that definitely makes a big difference. We have a question here that came up during the conversation. This is actually from
Hmm.
Valzers. So Valzers is
Yeah.
asking, so I believe I'm scheduled for the AstraZeneca vaccine, but I heard that alternatives should be recommended due to my age, which is under 40. Is this something I should worry about, or should I just go ahead with the AstraZeneca vaccine?
So that's a fantastic question, and has something to do with the AstraZeneca with the blood clotting events, the blood clotting slash thrombotic events. Now, again, it is your choice, really, whichever you decide. They're all fantastic vaccines, by the way. Like I would take the AstraZeneca. So just to let you know beforehand, it's really what we do typically when we're given an option, we always want to discuss the possibility risk. Any person who works in health or anyone who talks like kind of are developing it, we want to make sure that we will offer those options. So in this case right here, we do know that there are some rare instances of blood clotting events that are associated with AstraZeneca within a specific subset of group. This is the same with J&J, by the way, as well, right? The Johnson and Johnson. We know that women under a certain age bracket are typically higher risk. So for us, what we try to do is when we're about to administer, we're like, okay, Jane Doe, we know that you're in this age group. Just to let you know that there is a risk option. Do you still want to take that? And again, it's very rare. It's very like there's the chances of you getting it are very minimum. However, it's imprudent for us to actually make sure that we communicate that. So probably that's what's happening here is that you are within the vulnerable age group that we observed. Remember, it's what we observed within that vaccine group. So if you do want to take that, or if there are other options, feel free to explore those options. I'm not going to tell you no. Absolutely. But if the AstraZeneca is your only choice, I would not be so stressed out about it, but totally understand if you do worry about it. But I want to make sure that you are well aware. And this is me talking from a healthcare perspective that there is a certain level of risk that's associated that's a little higher than most folks because of the observed blood clot events within that age group.
Very good. There you go. So we still have a ton of vaccine questions, but vaccines are it's a very important topic to talk about. So this is from Sleepy. Sleepy asked, due to the variants, is there still research being done for more types of vaccines, or has all vaccine research stopped?
Oh no, we're still going. Like we are still going, going, going. I can tell you right now, two people I know. one who works at Moderna, one who works at Pfizer. Like literally all they do is just monitor variants and are sequencing and getting the data and developing possible boosters or developing possible booster shots or maybe like another shot down the line. They're constantly developing it because what they're trying to do right now is get ahead of the ball game. Uh, I can guarantee you with 100% my left and right arm that research is still ongoing. That's not going to stop. I can guarantee you that right now. So don't worry about that.
All right. Continuing with the vaccine questions, Brazoki is asking, were the side effects of the second shot from the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines something that was predictable, or was it a surprise to the medical community?
I wouldn't say it was surprise really. Like we knew that there was going to be side effects. I don't think anyone who's working in immunology of any sort is going to expect that having any vaccine you won't have any reaction. Like I think we were a little surprised, and I mean like little, like I mean like we literally like we twitched an eyebrow like that surprise. But like when we realized that there was like a little bit higher occurrences of side effects, which is true for the mRNA vaccine. And obviously with like some of the blood clotting events that are associated with the adenovirus one. But I don't think it's anything like we were taken aback to the point where we are like, oh my God, like we never thought this would happen. Like we all approached this with the idea that this would be something that could possibly happen. And there might be some events that we don't measure or weren't anticipating. So wouldn't be surprised. I don't think we were surprised at all
Was
from
there
that
more
perspective.
of kind of an expectation of side effects due to the mRNA technology? Because side effects from vaccines are not new, correct? Just in general.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, side effects also, remember, they're more centered around the immunological response, not the technology. So it doesn't matter which technology we use. We know our immune system always reacts in a certain way. We know that within some parameter that your immune system will react in a way because your immune system is a fickle little fucker, as I like to call it
Mm-hmm.
colloquially. It literally like if one thing perturbs or something happens, like I mean, something as simple as like you eating something that's not right, your immune system is just like, nah, fam, crank up the heat. We're gonna have a high fever, got diarrhea, and all sorts of stuff. Like it's very fickle. Like, and it's why I always like one of the things that I tell people you should always watch out for when you're out in public or anything like that is if you see anything that says boost your immune system. That is the stupidest phrase I could tell you right now ever in existence in a medical jingle, like jargon, because you don't want to boost your immune system. Your immune system has to be balanced. Your immune system can't be too strong because if it's too strong, it attacks your body. If it's too weak, then it's not going to be able to fight off infections. So it has to be that right in the middle where it's just perfect enough to it can address infections but not attack your body in and of itself. That's what autoimmune diseases really are. And so and Zodiac says the essential oils. But yeah, the idea behind it is really just you know, balanced approach, really. But our immune system will always maintain a level of homeostasis. It always likes to maintain a level of homeostasis. It doesn't want to go too far out. If it does, then you're kind of screwed from that perspective.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Continuing with vaccines, Alice is asking, so it's supposed to be 21 days in between doses of the vaccine, but here in
Mm,
Canada, they make us wait 16 weeks. Is that an
yeah.
issue? Can it make the vaccine less effective?
That absolutely. So this is actually more of a supply level question. It has nothing to do with like whether if it's effective or not. But I mean, they did kind of had some sort of study regarding like delaying the time dosage as well. Now, this has not been consistent, so I'm not going to quote on that. There's no consistency regarding data regarding delaying your second dose and if in terms of like increased or reduced efficacy. And I say it's inconsistent because sometimes some show that, oh, your antibody responses are pretty robust even after several weeks, and some of them are like, eh. So if it's inconsistent, I don't typically subscribe to it because I'm like, that doesn't make me feel comfy, right? So in the case of Canada's situation right now, this is the unfortunate factor of Canada was that Canada got dicked over royally by supply purely. You really didn't have much in terms of like going in to kind of be able to have that option as well. And so as a result of it, like like the Canadian government, or I know from the health ministries that they decided to like extend delay that just because of that. And it was effective in some, I think, in some like municipals and things like, or different like cities and things like that. But again, like I prefer that you do it within the 2, 3 weeks or so to make sure you get the full effectiveness. And I see that someone did mention the UK as well, and that's true as well. Like I know UK was like looking into that as well, and it doesn't give me the comfort really. And I just say from my own professional standpoint, I don't think it's the approach we should be going to delaying the second vaccination. But I suppose if you are very low on supply for some time, that you should definitely do it. But if you have the supply, there should be no reason why you should be delaying that second dosage for that long. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people that are getting this delay, like in Alice's case, they're not choosing, to wait that long. It's just something that can't be helped because of the supply. Is there any concern that people should have that they have to wait that long?
I mean, again, it's one of those things again, like when I was mentioning like the example with the shield and the armor, right? Like having the one shot doesn't mean that you're completely naked. Like you still have some protection. You're just probably not going to be as like protected, I guess, quote unquote, like in terms of like you're not going to be like a second shot like 2 weeks after that, like that type of protected, right? And so I think it's just a matter of really gauging your risk factor from there. Like if you are only having one shot, like treat it as you don't have a shot, and for now until you get your second shot, I guess. Um, and that's just my opinion, really. Like if you, especially like since like most of our guidances really are like post 2 week shot if it's a 2 week regimen as well, which is why it's important that we have like things such as like Jerry Johnson and Johnson, which is one dose, right? So it's kind of nice. You get one and done. It gives it as much as you can.
All right. Thank you for that insight. So this is another question, which I asked. It's kind of lengthy,
Hmm.
so bear with me. According to a New York Times article on April 25th, the CDC reported that over 5 million people, which is roughly 8% of the US population, didn't get their second vaccine dose. Interviews with these people revealed that some feared the side effects of the second dose, while others thought
Hmm.
they were sufficiently protected with just the first dose. In some cases, vaccine suppliers ran out of stock or didn't have the right
Yeah.
brand of vaccine in stock. What repercussions does this have on those that are partially vaccinated? And what would you suggest as a solution?
So in terms of repercussions, right? Like, I mean, we're going to inevitably see more quote unquote what we call infections. So these are usually like infections that happen after people who are vaccinated because they're not technically 100% vaccinated. We'll probably might see more of those if they continuously engage in risky behavior. Uh, so I guess like from a population or community perspective, we can assume to expect that possibly. Um, but that doesn't mean that we might not see it as a high rate of incidence either because they already did get their first shot. They already have some level of protection. So we're hoping, and obviously there's a lot more folks out there who are probably vaccinated as well. And obviously what we're also seeing too, and this I remember that study as well, that article. We have to remember too that there's a lot more sites that are opening up right now with availability. Like we're finally get to the comfortable point where there's a lot more availability than there is demand. So we can assume that that number is somewhat been chipped away from that. Regarding the secondary, like, side effects and everything like that, it's definitely like a legitimate concern, right? Like I know I talked to some people who are like, well, I don't want to take the second dose because I can't skip work. Like I can't take off work for that reason. Like, and I got to put food on the table. Like these are legitimate concerns and everything like that. So I think like if we're going to address anything like that, we need to think about one like which I've been really liking is like we're incentivizing a lot of places to like provide like, hey, if you come here, it's a free burger, a free beer, or like New York like city, like they're offering free train tickets like for the week of for Subway or whatever for people for they were giving J&J out for folks there. Like we have to incentivize folks. And I also think too, like we need to be much more. We need to think of ways that we can start supporting a lot of businesses to ensure that people can take off comfortably as well, so that they don't worry about if they do get knocked out for 48 hours, that they don't feel obligated to go to work. Because that's a very legitimate concern for a lot of lower socioeconomic groups, is that they can't afford to take a day or two off. That's $200-300 that goes towards like groceries for their family, and you're telling them to do that. And I don't blame them for like saying like, no, fuck you, I'm gonna go to work and I'm not gonna worry about that. I got some protection, I'm good. So I think we really need to just address like just in general like what are the pain points that a lot of groups and to be much more convenient for them. We need to start being convenient for the groups of people. Like we need to be going to them and saying, guess what, we're going to make it easy. We're going to either give you gift cards. We're going to give you, we're going to get the injection to you instead of you having to take off work. We're going to go to your work. We're going to go to your house. We're going to go to your community, go to your church, and we're going to offer vaccinations as well. You're still not going to address some of the ones where people who are concerned about taking time off, but it's it's much better and it's a lot powerful actually when you see people in a community setting when they're seeing others getting their vaccines, which is why like I've been ranting nonstop on Twitter about the fact that getting mobile clinics out to like lower socioeconomic areas is going to be so critical. We need to stop hoping that they'll come to us and we need to go to them. And I think that that's how we're going to address it. But I also want to state the point too that even that statistic when it came out, and I'm in agreement with a lot of my colleagues as well, like getting even 5 million people with the first dose with a loss to follow up from that statistic is a remarkable job. Like we did a humongous amount of effort right there. Even with their partial protection, it's still a humongous effort. And I don't want to diminish that at all. That was like a huge effort. We did a fantastic job. We definitely need to be, I think we need to start thinking outside the box. We need to be much more, like I said, accommodating for people. We need to be willing to support people in the fact that we're saying like, you know what? I understand your concern. I understand your fear. What can I do to make it easier for you to get the second vaccine? And that's the mindset we should be going into.
Yeah, I think a lot of, especially private companies and organizations, can kind of incentivize their employees, right? And give them paid time off specifically for the vaccine. I think
Absolutely.
that would help a ton.
Absolutely. I think that that would be a fantastic idea. Like have a special time set aside for 48 hours to have them take the vaccine or anything like that. But we should definitely do that.
Yeah, I think that would help. So moving to the next question here. This is from Fish866 asking, do you think COVID will ever be eradicated or will it just hang around forever like the flu and we'll have to get COVID vaccines every year, just like the flu?
So I don't think it's going to disappear. Actually, we know for a fact, I think for at this point right now, we don't think it's going to disappear. Most of the experts in the field believe that it'll become what we call endemic. So it's going to hang around, but it'll be lower prevalences and only localized in certain areas. But that's good because essentially, but that in terms of like, we can definitely try to get it to the point where there's much less transmission and like damn near close to zero. I think that's within the realm of possibility, but it'll require a lot of work. But right now, like the easiest goal right now that we can do is get it down to the point where it is such low transmission that, if someone does get it, like either they can not have to go to a hospital because it's so minor, right? They'll just have to quarantine, they'll just stay home. Or there's like so few cases that do get hospitalized that it doesn't overwhelm our hospitals, right? That was like one of the biggest like I guess like cracking factor really about this whole thing is watching like our health system crumble under the weight of COVID. That's why we talked about like, flatten the curve, flatten the curve. And that whole idea really is that we want to get to a point where a disease is manageable. Disease is getting to the point where it's low enough that we're not having to worry about it. But that being said, I definitely think there's ways that we can do this, that we can figure out a way to get it down to damn near zero. But I don't want us like, chasing our own tails constantly to try to approach that. But for right now, like in terms of like what I see in terms of realistic aspects of it, we can get to a point, hopefully, once more people are vaccinated and the rest of the world is vaccinated, that we can create essentially what we call like endemic virus or like, disease in this case.
So, just kind of a follow up to that, if it becomes endemic, then will we need
Mhm.
boosters every so often?
We don't know. Well, we might need boosters, but we don't know how long it'll be because we just don't know enough about it because we just started administering really hardcore with this vaccine within like the past few months. So for us to actually determine how long this immunity or protection lasts, it's just kind of right now we're kind of evaluating things right now. So it might be 2 years, it might be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. We don't know. There was a study that was produced recently regarding the MERS and SARS, the original SARS-CoV strain that they saw that there was like 5 year protection regarding that. So from an very educated, very like high level like guess, I don't foresee it being like a yearly ordeal. I don't foresee that happening. But again, that could also change based on how quickly we're stopping variants or how quickly are we stopping transmission, right? Like the more people the virus can host, the more likely it'll mutate, the more likely we'll see variants that pop up that might be able to evade it. But right now, we know that our vaccines are effective against all the variants that are known out there right now. And we should, in this case right now, be vaccinating as quickly as possible.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. This is another question here coming from Andu asking, apart from posting on social media to say that I've received my vaccine, is there anything I can do as an individual to promote vaccination in the US? I read about a focus group that showed that vaccine hesitant people tend to dig in deeper into their opposition if exposed to the wrong kind of pro vaccine messaging.
That's a very good question. And yeah, absolutely. And so one of the many things you know, I don't even do it in my own social media, but like I know that, well, I kind of do actually. But I think one of the many things like you can start doing as an individual is like one, just posting about the fact that, like, hey, I did get the vaccine and I'm able to share moments with my family now. I'm able to do these and I'm able to do that. I don't have any side effects, like, or even being open about your side effects too. Like, I even created in my own Discord channel, which ODS knows that, like, I created a channel specifically for communicating what your vaccine experience is like. I want people to type up their stories, right? Like, good or bad. I want people to be honest about it. And people have been sharing stories. And I think that's really good when you were able to do that. And I think when you approach the second part of that, I guess, like when you approach someone who's vaccine hesitant, never ever downtrod or like tell them that their feelings are insignificant. That's absolutely the wrong way to go about it. And it's half the reason why some of them will dig their heels down and be like, no, I don't really care about it. So the best way to really do it is just understand what it is that they're concerned about. And like have them talk. You should be doing less of the talking. They should be doing the talking. And if they are willing to listen to you, which is another thing you got to open up for, then you can open yourself up to like, additional like sort of resources and things like that. I've talked to several people already on my own Twitter and, they would come up and they're like, hey, I'm just really concerned about, A, B, and C. And I'm like, okay, well, first off, let me ask you, is that all that you're concerned about or is there other stuff? And I let them talk. And then the second that they're done, I'm like, okay, are you willing to hear out my reasons for it? You invite them, like give them the power to talk, let them hear you if you're geared to talk about it, right? Like, and I say like not everyone is geared to talk about it. Like some people get very emotional, which is not something you want to do. If you're gonna get antagonistic in any way, don't get antagonistic. These are people who want to just get the information straight and want to get it right and understand it. So for you to go and attack them or for you to kind of come at them aggressively, I don't think anyone's gonna like that. No one ever like you've seen Twitter. Like if anyone attacks people or get aggressive, it rarely is a moment where a person's just like, you know what, you're right. Let me just delete my thread. Like it's very like so I think you have to think of it from that perspective. So but in terms of like dealing with them, like it's best to kind of hear them out and really just lay out the facts if you do know it. And if you don't, then offer other options. Like, are you willing to listen to someone else who does know about it? I've had people refer folks over to me to talk through them through it. So there are folks who are legitimately anti-vaxxers. Like they truly believe that Bill Gates is about to inject a computer chip into it, and they nothing will change their mind. Disengage. You disengage, and you're like, okay, and you don't engage further. Like that doesn't like for those folks, like they've made up their mind. There's not really much you can do at that juncture to really convince them.
All right. Thank you for that input. So moving on to the next question. This is from Sleepy. Sleepy is asking, is there a risk that rich nations getting fully vaccinated will reduce the interest in vaccination when it is time for poorer countries and will allow COVID-19 to keep mutating into new variants?
It's already happening right now. We already have B1617, which is a variant of concern in India as a result of it. I don't know if there's like an issue regarding like uptake of the vaccine. I mean, some countries have some, like Tanzania, for example, has had some issues with uptake because of local leaders and things like that. But I think majority of the countries are asking for it. But it's just that we're kind of hoarding it really. Like that's not even me like being snarky. We are like the United States currently sits on like a lot of vaccines right now that are not like there's one county they were doing a news report that they have like 600 doses that have been sitting in freezers for the past 2 weeks. No one's been getting the vaccine, nothing. Like it's just been sitting there. And to me, like I'm like thinking, I'm like those 600 doses can go to Uruguay or Burkina Faso and like vaccinate like half a village right there. So there's a lot of things that like we should be doing. And like the thing is that yeah, if we leave this unchecked, there's a chance that we might see more variants, we might see more key mutations that could make variants of concern and make our lives a lot harder, right? Like right now we've seen a lot what happens right now with countries that no one is like immune to like outbreaks and just how bad it can collapse the system. Like India was like a good case example of a situation that just went horribly wrong. Brazil is another situation. Nepal, like they're all situations that have shown that like how delicate our health systems are in other countries. And we're not blessed like the United States where for the most part, we could go to a hospital within like 30 minutes drive from us. Like that's not something that's unheard of in a lot of countries, like for here. So we just have to think about from that perspective that there's a lot at stake here by not vaccinating the rest of the world.
So that kind of just made me think of this question. So I know that a lot of the main reason I believe that we as the U.S. are not sending out vaccines, especially Pfizer and Moderna, is because the previous administration signed a contract, right, with these vaccine companies that we can't, export vaccines until the U.S. population is vaccinated. Is that correct?
There was some language regarding that, yes.
And so
Yeah.
that's what's leading to the oversupply of vaccines here as well, in terms of less demand and more vaccine supplies.
Part of it, and also just like in general, like for Pfizer and Moderna, and there's been loopholes that were identified, and now we're doing the whole IP waiver, and we're looking into tech transfers and all this sort of stuff. We need to basically get those vaccines across the board. And sorry, to Sleepy's question, that was a really once the world is vaccinated, will companies try to keep providing it to world? They better. Like I hope so. Like it doesn't. I think like in this case right here, like for like even from a financial perspective, it doesn't make sense that they don't take advantage of it because someone has to cough up money to make those doses. Like it's not like they're just making them for free. It's for the most part for these other countries. And sometimes what ends up happening is that other countries pool money to essentially make these companies produce more so they can go to other countries. That's how multilateral donor relationships work, like the UN and things like that, or the WHO's COVAX program. That's how it essentially works right now, all of those vaccines. So they will still continue, but how fast they do it is a different story. And so with that whole situation right now regarding that whole IP situation right now, like the problem behind that as well is that like even if they do happen to get the contract with all, let's say everything is perfect from the legal side and everything like that, the technology to produce mRNA vaccine is very specific. Like we already have a shortage of the lipid nanoparticles, which is the thing that carries the mRNA vaccine, right? Like it's that fatty casing that brings it into the cell. that technology is very hard to come by, and they can't produce it as quickly as they can. And so that's like a stop. That's like a little bit of a stop limiting factor right there. But it also takes a special type of factory to produce these. And so for us, in order for us to get to the point, we need to be able to make sure that we can enable them in a way that all these other countries and all these other places can do it. And I think it's important that we do these IP waivers because now it sets a precedent for future vaccine development or future iteration of development that we're not locking, intellectual property behind for these vaccines behind 2, 3 companies in the 10 richest countries. Like it doesn't make any sense because we should be looking to outsource that and make sure that the rest of the world is vaccinated. It's also financially more sound because we're not having to spend kajillions of dollars to recover a country that's devastated by COVID, which to me is just, I don't know why it doesn't click for most world leaders. So we're certainly supportive of that. I know we're in the next hurdle is looking at the World Trade Organization to do that. But I think even solving from the legal side and all the paperwork aside, we still have a very big challenge ahead of us in terms of making sure that we have the technology to support like scaling up all of those. But what we can start doing right now, as you notice, is all those excess vaccines that we have in the United States and the rest of the world, we can start delivering those. We can start delivering those right now. Like there's no sense in keeping it here. We can start making sure that countries that don't have it, that they have the refrigeration unit ready and that we can give that to them. It makes no sense that we're sitting on it and not doing anything with it.
Is there any concern about some vaccines just kind of going to waste because they're just sitting there and there's not enough demand, they're not being used, we can't export them? They have a shelf life, correct? At least with the Moderna and Pfizer, they need refrigeration. So are there concerns that there are vaccines going to waste because of all this?
I mean, there could be, yeah, definitely. I think that there's always we're right now, we're hoping to reach 70 something percent everyone that, I think it was either first dose or second dose vaccinated by July 4th. I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to get there actually. But at that point right now, we should be really considering that there is a shelf life associated with it. I think it's a little longer than 3 months. Someone correct me on that one. I don't remember on top of my head for the mRNA vaccine. But yeah, there is a shelf life associated with it that we need to think of. And if it comes down to it and an area is just about to lose it or if there's 2, 3 weeks out, we should definitely consider thinking of a ways to get them to go to another country. Heck, even go to Canada or Mexico. Which I'm sure they can use that. There's a lot of places, even from not a lower middle income country that can use it. If we can't get it fast enough, and so it just doesn't make sense to me from that perspective. 30 days within the 6 months shelf stable life. Thank you. So there you go. So it looks like there is still some room right now for Moderna at least. So, but I don't think we should be waiting till the last minute to vaccinate people. I think if there's a county out there that has already vaccinated a majority of the people and the rest of the people are not willing to get vaccinated, then we should just take half of that supply and give it to other countries or give it to other places that are needing. Or even heck, within the United States, there's other places that desperately need it. Apparently there's still some counties and states here that don't have vaccines, which is astounding to me. So
Okay, looks like Pfizer is a shorter shelf life, or am I reading this right?
they're up to 30 days on the farm shipper vaccinations can transfer the vials to date for an additional 5 days for a total up to 35 days. I think there's a little bit more than that, ODS, but I think it's a little bit. I think that's from the logistics standpoint. I think it could be stored for a little longer, if I'm correct. But we can come back and visit that later.
Okay, very cool. So we did briefly kind of mention it earlier, but this is, I've been wanting to talk about it, but we're going to talk about India because there's a lot going on there. So I asked this question. These numbers are definitely different now, but back when I asked it, this was the case. India is currently going through a huge COVID outbreak after previously having had mostly mild cases and low death counts. They've gone from fewer than 100 deaths in February to over 2,000 per day now. What lessons can we learn, if any, from what's happening in India? So that those numbers are definitely higher now. I think it's more than 2,000 per day. Unfortunately, I want to say I
Yeah.
read it's like over 300,000 new cases every day. So it's really drastic out there. Can you tell us what's going on?
So for India's situation here, there is like a so let's go back in a little bit about the story about India and its Prime Minister Modi, who was the leader there. Now, Prime Minister Modi, when this first happened, he implemented one of the strictest lockdown measures in the whole world. It was actually heralded as one of the strictest things, right? Like there were people, there was literally like police that went down the street and they caught you outside, they would beat you. Like it was like it would like they would punish you. It was that strict. And it was like, and because of that, like India had like record low cases. Like there was just nothing. I mean, of course you're gonna have that if no one is like literally going out and about. People are just stuck at home the whole time. But what ended up happening was the untold story behind that was that it disproportionately affected a lot of poor and a lot of the transitory kind of like labor groups that are like people who run stands and things like that. Like those people were severely affected because they had no ways of income. They based their whole livelihood was destroyed. So now this whole like lockdown happened for like a long time, and when it was released, Modi basically came out and was like going on a victory speech saying like, hey, we conquered COVID, suck on it, and like went on this whole hurrah parades and all sort of stuff. People were like saying like Modi was the best. And unfortunately, like those he started just loosening restrictions more and more. And on top of that, like it was a very disorganized from like a local like city government, all that perspective. They were just all doing their own thing. And also Modi didn't want to get engaged with outside production as well. He was basically focused mainly on production of vaccines in India. So the Serum Institute of India, which is like big vaccine production there, it actually produces the most vaccines in the world. They were producing their own version of the AstraZeneca vaccine called Covishield. And then there's another cool group called Bharat that was creating their version. So they were kind of producing along, and it was very lackluster. It was very kind of like, whatever. Like it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Sure enough, nature took its course, and what we're observing here essentially is just that like a surge in cases as well happened because more people were gathering, the more like restrictions were going down, people weren't masking, no one like there was no real and if you ever been to India, like in any of those bigger cities, it is crowded. Like you are constantly like pressed against person constantly in these cities. So chances of you probably catching COVID probably pretty high because literally someone could be breathing on you right over your shoulder at any time of the day. And as this just continue, we start seeing a lot of these cases go up. And Modi's government basically did not take any action, despite the fact that there was continuous rising cases. They took a very like stand back approach, and it wasn't until like it got to the point where we started seeing fatalities like rivaling that of the U.S. at its peak. That the government started waking up, and they realized that there was a problem. Like oxygen was running out, which like for a lot of people who that's one of the biggest issues with COVID is the ability to breathe, is that absolute lung collapse. And so people were literally dying on the streets waiting to get into a hospital because there was not enough beds. And that's what's happening right now with a lot of these places that are just overwhelmed with patients and they don't know what to do. And it just keeps getting worse day by day. And there's not enough vaccines either. And the problem is that the situation right now, and everyone will tell you, is that you can't vaccinate your way out of that situation right now. Right now, at this point, it means we just need to be able to find ways to supply as much oxygen as we can, supply as many like mobile clinics as we could to help support some of the cases that we have here, and really make sure that we're providing the best possible treatment possible. Like it's so important right now where we need every resource possible to really fix India. And the scary thing is, and I tell people this as well, that India is a situation that could have happened to the United States if we hadn't taken action like we did before. Like this would have been the case here. Very much so. We were close in many different areas. Like there were places in New York, Seattle, Chicago, I think, where situations had almost gotten to that point, but we were close, but never got to the point that India is. And what's scary too is that India is like the lead producer of the oxygen tanks. So the fact that they ran out tells you that it was that serious of a situation of there. And yes, as ODS has reminded that pharmacists are being like there's a shortage of staff as well. There's a huge short staff like healthcare workers shortage right now as well because it's just that bad. So I think it's a combination of government unwillingness to do anything, the delay, and also them downplaying the virus itself. Hell, even right now, like to this day, Modi's own party, the BJP, and I don't remember the full acronym as to what it means. His own party are still holding rallies and parades during the peak of this whole issue right now. They're still holding that, and Modi's not stopping them. He's like saying like, yes, go and have fun and celebrate me. Like, it's leaders like that that's actually causing more harm than anything, and it is inaction. And what's scary is that because like right now we're starting to get mRNA vaccines into India. Modi's government is taking a hands-off approach about it. He's basically said local cities and governments, you guys handle it. I'm not going to touch this. So it's very disjointed in its approach, and there's like they don't know what to do, and there's like a lot of confusion, and it's just a bad formula for everything.
That's a very devastating, just everything. I don't even.
Yeah, I know.
It just breaks
It's a
my
very
heart, hearing about it. But we do have a follow-up question here that came in chat during our discussions that I think kind of applies. Angarat asked, are medical researchers worried about the various variants from India? I just want to clarify that.
Mhm.
Don't call it the Indian variants because that does apply, a racial bias to it that we don't want to do in the same way that people call COVID-19 the Chinese virus. So just to clarify there, you can say the variants that originated in India, just to clarify.
Yep. That were first identified in India.
First identified in India. There we go. And the efficacy of the current vaccines out there now.
So good news is that we have seen that some of that all the vaccines are still effective against it. In fact, and right now we're looking at you're going to see a lot of panic headlines on there, which I absolutely detest. They'll say it's the double mutant, triple mutant. Those are all bullshit titles. They were literally invented for pure sake of sensationalism. Like these mutations there's like all these variants have like several mutations. It's not just 2, 3. It's like 15 or 16. I'm just guessing on a number. It's higher than that. And it's only like several key mutations that we should be worried about. And I can tell you right now that every single one of these are being evaluated in terms of like if it is something that could cause higher transmissibility, whether if it cause more severe disease, or whether if it can escape the immune response in general. So those three things are being monitored for that purpose. But the thing is that with India's situation is that we aren't sequencing enough data. So we're having a hard time to really pinpoint whether if it's truly more transmissible, is it truly able to do all these things. But we're still evaluating that. But from like some of the initial kind of like papers and like experiments and things like that we've seen is the fact that these variants are still under control within the vaccine realm. Like there's a little bit lower like efficacy, but it's still within the realm of like, hey, it's an effective vaccine. So don't worry about that. I won't stress about it at this point right now based on some of the data we're seeing. But that being said, we're like Hawkeye over that situation, and we're trying to get more data, right? Because there's a lot that needs to be done in order for us to do what we call an effective genomic surveillance of that. And until that happens, we can't make a lot of judgments on it. And that's why we have variants of interest versus variants of concern, right? And some people have right now classified the variant in India, or that was identified in India, as being something of concern, which is fine because it has exhibited some things that would deem that. But obviously we still need to see additional data to see if it's something that would need to reposition us for other stuff. But I can tell you right now, some of the other scientists I've talked to have, they are concerned, but they're not to the point where it's like, oh God, we really need to worry about our vaccines not working here.
So they're keeping an eye on it, basically. This is not something they're
Yes.
dismissing, right?
Everyone is, I can tell you any like question dealing with like, are they still researching? Are they still monitoring? Oh, yes. Everyone is like, it's just, I, I don't think you're going to stop seeing COVID headlines for the next 2 years. We're going to be monitoring this thing like for a while.
That's good to hear. So a kind of follow up to that, Vinius here asked, is there a possibility of the strain from India reaching other countries?
So it's not a strain. Don't make sure you don't use that word because strain conveys a different meaning in the world of viruses. It's a variant. Strain just means a completely different type of like virus in this case right here. We're not going to get into detail to the point where like enough mutations happen that it's a completely different thing. Variants is just like the virus just put on a new disguise. I guess if you want to think of it that way. But like strain is like if it literally goes under reconstructive surgery and comes out as a different person, like kind of in that aspect. So from that perspective, when we look at whether if it reaches other countries, it's already reached other countries. It's inevitably going to happen. Viruses are very resourceful. They'll people travel and like I think right now the United States, even though they limited, like I think we've seen some cases already here in the UK and a couple of other EU countries. So it's going to happen. It's going to show up in other countries, but it's not meant for us to panic and point fingers at India and close down all its borders to say that we can't do this anymore. Like that's not an effective strategy.
All right. This actually is a great segue into the next question, which was also from Vinius. Vinius asked, what is the geopolitical fallout with countries that are choosing to close their borders to Indian nationals because of what's happening in India? Will closing borders help?
It's a very good question. So in terms of like the geopolitical aspect, right now the closing of the borders is like I think Modi hasn't really like pointed fingers. I mean, he's kind of like been disgruntled over it, but it hasn't been anything where he's like stressed out over it. So I wouldn't, I mean, but there probably will be some fallout later down the line. And will close borders help? Not really. I mean, I think it'll help to some extent, but when you close borders, like, and you when you cut travel and everything like that, like, it ends up like from a psychological standpoint, not helping from a population perspective. Like there are better ways now that we have like resources to test and resources to kind of monitor that we can be able to figure out like how best to address it than rather say like cut off all traffic and all this other stuff from a country. I mean, I think most public health experts out there from the global health community are not big fans of just like straight out shutdowns and closed borders. Like those don't ever help a country, right? Like especially something like India where they're suffering and they probably need food. They probably need imports of things like that. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Moving on to our next question here. This is from Pixelated Soul. Pixelated Soul says, as I write this, there are headlines saying that herd immunity is not an attainable goal in the US. Apparently, enough people are apprehensive of the vaccine or are just straight up rejecting it on principle that this virus will stay relevant for some time. What do you think about this? Is this true? Can you foresee a scenario where all, or a vast majority of, the American public accepts the science that proves it protects us?
So this was a very controversial question that came up recently, and it was like a topic in the New York Times article, which I think this is what the article they're referencing. Um, so I'm going to talk about this from my perspective, and this might be controversial in the community. Like I don't know if we will reach to the point of like I guess like an ideal level of herd immunity, but I think we can get to a point where, and I think if we try hard enough, like we can get to some level of herd immunity that is acceptable. But I think one of the many things that people typically had trouble dealing with in terms of like working with this idea was that We just will not get there. We're gonna have so much trouble. We're gonna have we should it's just something of a battle which we shouldn't go for. And then there's another camp that says like, like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, like this is possible. Like we can totally do it if we really buckle down. So I'm kind of in the middle between there, like, because I could see both sides. Like, there's a lot to kind of digest from that. We can also look at herd immunity too from a community perspective as well. Like herd immunity doesn't even have to be looked at from a global like perspective as well. Like we can look to see like successes as well in like a country perspective and everything, and see how best we can monitor that. But in general, will we ever approach herd immunity? I'm not going to say no. I think we can. It just might take longer, and it might take additional resources. So I think it's a very bad narrative to say that we'll never get there. I mean, with the current resources and the current output that we have, probably because we're not doing enough. But this is why I'm critical about some of our vaccine strategies, because now we're like still expecting people to come to us to get the vaccine, but we should be much more aggressive about us going to the communities and vaccinating them. Like that's kind of the reason why, for that reason. And also like the rest of the world, they need to just get their damn vaccines in general. Like they don't even have shipments of vaccines. So again, there's a lot of steps that need to be taken for us to get to a point which we call herd immunity. And again, it's a moving goalpost, right? Like some people say like herd immunity achieved at 70%, 80%. I don't, for me, I just say we continue going. We just keep going and going and going. Stuff, I've literally told us, I say, fuck that number. Like just literally vaccinate as many as you can, focus on as much of response as we can possible. Because like if let's say if we do achieve 70% in vaccination, are you telling me you're going to stop right there? Or you're gonna slow down? No, like that doesn't make any sense. We should be continuously pushing for that. So I think it's kind of a moot point, really, to kind of like push for this artificial like point that really just kind of moves all over the place based on like population dynamics and the infection and current infections and things like that. Like I think we should always just be current aggressively vaccinating as much as we can. And that should be the message right now we should be focusing on. And I guess we're losing sight of the trees for the forest.
Very good. Thank you for that insight. Moving on to the next question here. This is from Twining. Twining is asking, is the medical professional community concerned about what will happen when things, quote unquote, go back to normal in regards to pent up energy that people may have had in the last year but haven't had an outlet for it, like increased rage due to frustration from being stuck indoors, lack of mental health care, etc.?
Possible. I mean, I don't have a specific statistic. I mean, this is just my gut feeling. So I'm not coming from a scientific perspective here. It's possible. Like, I mean, we're already pretty have higher cases of anxiety, higher situations of depression and things like that. Um, it might be that people more engage in more risky behavior because now they're out and open. But I think also I think we tend to understate the fact that a lot of people, uh, even myself, like it's gonna take us time to get used to going out and about. Like I know for me that outside transmission is very rare, but I still wear a mask because I'm still not comfortable with going out and about, especially in New York, in middle Manhattan, where there's a lot of people, right? And like I'm like, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. I'm gonna wear a mask. That's just like kind of reflective of like the behavioral aspects of it, that it'll take some time to integrate back into it. Sure, there's going to be higher cases of like, that quote unquote pent up energy or anything like that. But I don't think it's going to be as like, explosive as people thought. I mean, I think a lot of people have already kind of like demonstrated that, I guess, in some sense already. And already in like, I think people are going to be much more, have higher cases of anxiety and trepidation before they're going to go out and be crazy, or not crazy, excuse me, that's a bad word, to be much more reckless to their behavior.
Yeah, not to mention, I think, we always say go back to the old normal, but I think we addressed this in part one. We feel like going back to the old normal is probably not going to happen, right?
No, I think right now we're getting to a new norm right now. And I think it's a bad way, not bad way. I don't think it's an accurate way to say that we're going to be going back to the usual back in the day. Like it'll take time before we get to some semblance of normality, but it probably won't be what you remember before the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a very good point to remember. I guess I missed this question when we were addressing the mental health aspect of it, so we are going to backtrack a little. Another
Sure.
question from Twining asking, do you think the accessibility to mental health care will move in a positive direction after seeing how being stuck inside, entirely alone for some people, has affected people's mental states because of the pandemic?
Maybe, but not enough to make a huge This is my honest, pessimistic view based on what I've seen so far. I think it's made some improvement, but there's a huge crisis with our mental health in general. Like, if just look at like a lot of the stuff going on Twitch and a lot of fundraisers are going on and a lot of the situations that's trending. Like, our mental health institute is very broken. It's very yeah, like I think right now, like for the pandemic, it broke it and we fixed it a little and we managed to put a nice band-aid over it. But I don't think coming out we're gonna see it significantly like improve, maybe a little bit, but I don't have high hopes that we're gonna do a lot. We're gonna gain that momentum back in terms of really addressing it until we really, really like hone in on it. But that's just my honest opinion.
Okay. Very good. So we're gonna do another question here. We have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight more questions, and that's it. If you want, if we can take a quick break if you want before we do the rest, it's entirely up to you. Or we can just keep going and power through the rest of these. It's
I got it. I'm
we
done.
got
I'm
it.
good.
Okay, let's go. So Alice here asked, why do you think most governments were not adequately prepared for a pandemic, even though experts were warning that this would happen at some point in time? Because pandemics are not brand new, you know? What can we do then as a global community, once all of this is over, to be better prepared for a future pandemic?
So, actually, a quick correction. I mean, this is very brand new. This is the first global pandemic we've experienced. We've never had a global pandemic of this proportion or this magnitude ever. Like, we had outbreaks or we've had epidemics. I think got close to pandemic, but even then, like, I don't think we got to the point where it's like this, right? Um, and a lot of governments. I mean, I'm not going to speak for our government because our last administration kind of threw out the pandemic playbook. It literally threw it out. I don't think there's a way that we could have predicted everything that was going to happen. Like, we didn't know, like there was no way we could have predicted that mRNA vaccines would save us. There was no way that we could have predicted that there was going to be such a huge uprising in anti-vax movement. We kind of did, or we didn't predict that there's going to be a global shortage in certain areas. Like, there's so many things that we probably didn't like really do, and it also reflects the fact that we don't know what type of virus is going to occur, right? Like if there is truly a pandemic, we don't know what if for us it would have to we would have to be able to predict every type of sickness that could come down the line that could be constituted as a pandemic, I guess. So for us, really, like this, the reason why this one was such a hard thing to do is because not only were we trying to navigate a very difficult political environment, we politicized this disease, we were also dealing with a disease that we knew very little of. We had some inkling, but we were still trying to discuss it. Like, remember the first few months we were discussing the fact that, oh, there's a chance that you can transmit it, be it from fomites or surfaces. So people were like madly like wiping down every surface and everything because they were worried that if they touched something that it would infect him. Like, fast forward a few more months, we were like, oh, well, that's not the case here because we looked at the science and we did some additional studies and realized that it's an airborne disease and that getting the viruses through, from close contact droplets or aerosolized from distance. And, that significantly changed like how we approached interventions. And so I think there's a way we can somewhat gear up better, but I think one of the many things that we can learn better about is like coordination amongst government, coordination with private institutes like us and the pharmaceutical industries. Also better prepared the rest of the world in a sense like we should start looking at building facilities, manufacturing facilities outside of the richest 10 countries in other countries as well. Start building that right now so that we have the capacity ready in case something does need to be scaled up, that we have they're ready to go. I think right now what this virus has or this pandemic has taught us is that like how centralized the response is, which is like within the top 10 richest countries. And that's not healthy for the rest of the world because the rest of the world couldn't even afford the goddamn vaccine. So, um, you know, I think a lot can be learned from it. And also just in general too, like we should be focusing much more about looking at preventative measures, right? We should be looking at investing in public health surveillance, like having people who are literally there, specifically there to monitor. And this is part of Biden's, like, plan, and he did put money into, is stand up a analytical center that's basically focused on monitoring possible outbreaks worldwide. Like, is there a possible virus that comes from a bat in Mongolia? We're on it. We're going to start looking into it. See if it's possible it can be transmitted to humans. Like these are things that we should be doing and should have been doing a long time ago. And I think there's a lot that we could have, would have, should have at this point, but it's kind of moot point right now. And I think the best thing we can do as an international community is gather a lot of the lessons we learned and really come together as a global community, right? Like we need to stop this nationalistic approach from each country to say that we need to protect our citizens and our citizens only. Like we had a lot of that for the first half of the year. And that made the response significantly harder when we started developing vaccines, because then it became like, okay, well, who's my BFF who's going to get the vaccine first? And it's just not a sustainable response at all.
Yeah, I think that's a very important lesson to learn, is for just the global community as a whole to not get complacent, right? Even if we do officially get to declare the pandemic officially over, to keep continuing to monitor, as you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something
Yeah.
that goes beyond, the borders of every country, and it's a global health thing. So, very good
Yeah.
point there.
And it's okay, by the way, you can wipe your phone.
Yeah, I was
mean, our
wondering.
phones are
I was
pretty
gonna follow up
disgusting.
with that. Am I just strange for continuing to wipe my phone down every time I come back in from going outside? Because I still do that. I didn't realize that you don't necessarily need to.
No, you don't need to, but if you do it, it's not like the end of the world. So I
Okay.
wouldn't stress out about it. I mean, there are other things. And like I actually made a post recently about like how some guys were like, don't wipe down gym benches or anything like that.
Oh
And I'm
yeah, I
like, well,
saw that post.
I was like, but there's also things like staph infections and all these other like nasty little bacterial infections that happen if you don't wipe it down. So it's not a big deal. Like I still, for a fact, I'm gonna tell you right now, like every time my husband and I come home, we still wash our hands before we pet our cats because we're so paranoid about possibly transmitting to our animals if we happen to have it on our hands or anything of the sort. Like we're just cautious factor. And I don't think it's anything a big of a deal if you still wipe your phone.
Okay. Yeah, because we still do the same. We come home, wash our hands before we pet the cats. I still wipe my phone down. I didn't realize that you didn't have to, but I mean, I'm still going to do it because it makes me feel a little bit better.
That's
You
fine.
know?
You know what? Do you? I
Yeah.
tell you right now, my husband does it too still. He
Okay.
still does it after he gets home from the hospital. Even though I told him, I was like, the literature doesn't show that it exists on fomites for long. He's like, I don't care. He still does it. So I was like, okay.
Okay, I'm glad.
So,
I'm glad it doesn't make me strange or like the only one out there doing it.
nah, no, not at all.
All right, cool. Well, on to the next question. This is also from Metric. Metric is
Okay.
asking, as a Canadian, it's been explained to me that our vaccine rollout has been greatly impacted by actions of the Trump administration, and in complete honesty, the Canadian government has fumbled things too. Going forward, do you think that there's a chance to create a framework with the World Health Organization or another organization to create a more equitable system for the tackling of future similar issues to COVID-19?
Um, so two parts to that question, really. Like, I think from the situation for Canada and US, like they're NAFTA and everything, like there's better ways that we could have negotiated a way that we can collaborate across the countries. And Trump administration basically gave a big middle finger to Canada. I'm not gonna lie, like that's basically what they did. And a lot of Canadians suffered for that. And also the Canadian government wasn't aggressively pushing back. Like that was like the biggest criticisms of their government as well. Like they just kind of like, okay, well, I'm gonna take it laying down flat. Which is, I mean, I'm not saying that this is my perspective. It's just like some of the comments I've seen. So I think a lot of the situations here in this case is right now we need to be strengthening and building better relationships within some like the U.S. and Canada aspects right there, and to better understand like where the gaps and how we can better facilitate transfers of these goods in a way that benefits both countries, right? And obviously with Trump, he did kind of like cock block a lot of the corporations from like really doing much. And Canada, unfortunately, like they didn't really have any mRNA vaccine producing factories there. They kind of, and so even though they ordered a lot, the U.S. was prioritized first before it went to Canada. So Canada basically got U.S.'s sloppy seconds, whatever's left of it, and it ended up hurting a lot of the response from there. And that was just unfortunately like poor planning and just a lot of no one expected what was going to happen. But I think hopefully moving forward that um, we can hopefully maintain or at least establish some sort of framework, like you said, where if such a pandemic situation like this does happen again, that U.S. and Canada can integrate better in terms of their response. Now, from a global perspective, absolutely. Like WHO, we should be much more engaged, and we have been since the Biden administration took place. It was the first thing he signed into act was joining the WHO and the COVAX movement. We went back and we're focusing on trying to figure out how best to do a strategic framework on the global perspective. Now, in order for a global framework to work, we need most of the countries kind of signed in on that and cooperating. And I don't know what it's going to look like after this pandemic is quote unquote over, but my hope is that part of it, what WHO is doing, and I have not been privy to some of the stuff they've been doing on the side, is whether if they're in the process of making sure that moving forward, this is kind of the framework we're going to work off of. But again, frameworks can only go so far because you have to think about the types of pandemics that might happen, right? Like based on what type of disease or what might be occurring. Let's say something does happen and you have super Ebola, which we can talk about some other time. Like Ebola is like a very different type of virus. And if that were to be in a way that's highly infectious and spread throughout the world, it would change how we would respond based on the disease aspect of it. So we have to think about it from the perspective that frameworks can work absolutely and they should be established, but we have to be much more amenable to the fact that they need to be changed based on how we're looking at different responses, how we're looking at different pandemics, viruses, and things like that. So hopefully that answered your question.
All right, very good points there. So moving to the next question, which is also from Metric, asking or saying, I'm a big proponent of the suspension of some freedoms in the face of a public health crisis. I understand that belief is not exactly common with most people, but when I see people scoffing at a 99.7% survival rate and writing off that 0.3%, it scares me how callous the common person can be towards others. Is there a way we can make more convincing arguments to get people to care about humanity in general? And Metric acknowledges that this is a huge question.
I think one of the many things that's just, I hate that percentage, by the way. Like I actually loathe whenever someone quotes me that percentage. So that actually is a little lower. It's like like we're starting to see that that case fatality rate is actually a little bit higher than that. That was taken like at the beginning of the pandemic. So I want people to understand that how stupid that statistic is when we're taking it from the beginning, when we were still trying to figure out how to count the damn thing in the system. That being said, even let's say, hypothetically speaking, 1% is a 1% case fatality rate. Now you take that and 1% and apply it to 7 billion, the world's population. How many is that? Someone calculate that for me in chat. And
1% of 7 billion. Quick, go.
I want to see what that number is.
Go chat. You have one job. 1% of
1%
7
of
billion.
7 billion.
That's a huge number, 7 billion.
You can Google it. It's fine.
70 millions?
Is it 70 million?
Is it? 70 million, apparently. Yes.
Yep, 70 million.
Okay. That's still a big number.
Yeah. So 70 million people. You're telling me that you're okay with 70 million people perishing because of that statistic. That's all you got to think about. Like that's not an acceptable number by any means.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I want to make sure people understand that when someone tries to approach it from that perspective, even 1%, and remember, this is a highly infectious disease that is more infectious than your average flu, and it's going around, it's worldwide, and not many places have like hospital capacities to accommodate for all those folks. 1%, 70 million deaths. Are you okay? Are you truly okay with that?
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I'm gonna say. Like that's like if anyone's gonna approach you with that mentality, that shouldn't be the case. And that's like the same with the whole children aspect, right? Some people were like, oh well, 1% of children will only perish from that. I was like, so you're okay with 100 kids dying? If we're playing the statistic game or if we're playing the numbers game, absolutely not acceptable, I think, when you start dealing with human life. So it's not for you to say either, like, especially for people who are privileged enough that you have access to healthcare, you have health insurance. Like, who are you to tell me that? Who are you to tell the rest of the world that 70 million is acceptable? So, but obviously, I would not approach it that way with that person. I'm just speaking in general to the crowd here. But think about much more the big picture here about what that statistics mean in the context of a bigger picture here. And that doesn't even include the people who might have long COVID effects, right? People who survive, who are asymptomatic. It's a higher percentage. So 20% of that. It's higher. And that number just gets larger. And that's just so much pain and hate, like long-term pain that no population should ever have to go through. And that's again one of the many things that it's why I get so frustrated when I see that number, that 99.71% and everything like that. And I'm like, okay, well, first off, stop getting that number from Facebook. That percentage has significantly changed. You can even quote 1% if you want to. Quote 1%. It's only 0.7 difference, right? Tell me, and then just ask them to calculate from a global perspective. Do it for them if they don't want to calculate for themselves. 70 million. It's not a fun number to think about when you start thinking about it. Especially if you compare it to how much of that, what's the percentage of that like across like the United States? Yeah. Exactly, Odious.
Also, really good points in chat about just the morbidities, the comorbidities coming out of it, to not just focus on life or death, So.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot at stake here beyond just death. Like, there's severe diseases that can persist. Like, there's a reason why we're talking about long COVID constantly, because there are people who are still suffering beyond there, like people who have, epilepsy, people who have, gastrointestinal issues, people who still have, like kidney issues and liver issues. Like we've seen cases where they're still persisting even after like mild infections. So this is just a burden we should not expect on the rest of the world.
All right. Well, that actually is a great segue into a question about long haulers. This is actually from Batch asking, what do you think of, or what have you seen in research about the use of fluvoxamine? I hope I said that right. For long hauler symptoms.
So fluvoxamine, I mean, I don't know about it in terms of like it being a long hauler treatment aspect of it. Fluvoxamine is much more what we're looking at is from like people we're treating with on a, is a therapeutic that we're looking at for people who currently have ongoing infections from COVID. So it's like kind of like a treatment option, not a vaccine, but for cases of people who do come into a hospital with that. There was a successful case of like 100. There was like a case study that was done for a small set of population that did show some success. They are still ongoing studies, so it's not part of any treatment regimen right now. For those of you who don't know, fluvoxamine is actually a drug that you can currently get prescribed to. It's what we call a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's for mainly treating like OCD or depression sometimes, and other kind of conditions as well. And if you want to go into, we can go into details if people want to, but in general, like we did see some promising data initially to see that it did limit what they call the cytokine reaction, which for those of you who knew at the beginning of it, we always talked about this thing called cytokine storm. So when you get COVID and it gets really bad, it creates this like nasty little feedback loop of what we call cytokine storm, which basically is like your immune system is like goes haywire a little bit, and you like like it starts attacking your own body. It's not a good thing to have. And so what we basically look at it from a mechanistic perspective from fluvoxamine is the fact that hey, this drug actually could limit the cytokine uh secretion or creation. And so we're looking at that and saying that maybe if we administer patients with fluvoxamine, it might limit the cytokine storm. And limited study, and I say limited, like there was like a very small population and number of samples, did show efficacy of it. But again, it needs a larger study to really be something that we would consider as a proper therapeutic option. So the answer to your question is we don't know yet, but it is something for consideration.
Okay, so a follow up question to that from someone who is a long hauler themselves. Calesta asks, is there a way to donate my living body to COVID research? The medical bills to figure out all the damage that having COVID has done to my body has been racking up to levels that I don't think I could ever imagine paying off, especially if I'm facing a life of permanent disabilities. I still have to navigate a for-profit medical system that doesn't understand the situation that I've been put in, and it's so overwhelming at times.
So first things first, I'm sorry that you're going through that, and I hope that hopefully that you get some sort of relief from that perspective. Um, with regards to like I guess like donating, I mean, I don't want to be morbid and say that you donate your body or anything like that, or anything in that case. You can donate your blood. You can donate your time as well to research for long COVID. There was a lot of different organizations. I think Batch posted like one for like longcovid.org or something like that. And there's one I posted if you're in Connecticut, which hopefully they'll be expanding soon, where there's a lot of research that are being done, and there's a lot of support groups. If you can lend your voices to being open about it also on social media and things like that to talk about it is very important as well. If you can, and I would always say, like I said, so find places that are willing to look for research and everything. There's a lot of researchers that are interested in long haul COVID. So I would suspect within like now till like the next end of the year, you're going to see a lot of like solicitations for uh, trial participants. Participate in them, like give them your time and data, because that data is so valuable. It's so valuable because we need to better understand what the full scope of effects are, especially if it's as serious as you are mentioning it to be. Um, the one that's being done in Connecticut is being led by Akiko Iwasaki, who's like she and I have talked to several times, and she's phenomenal individual, very bright person from Yale. She's conducting a long haul study in Connecticut, and they're gonna expand it out hopefully in the near future. So she's looking at possible ways as to like why it's causing long COVID. And she has some very good, wonderful theories that I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, and I think a lot of virologists and immunologists are behind her on that. So hopefully it expands to a global perspective. And if you are able to donate your time from there, do that. If you can look at other places, by all means. If you can find places where they're willing to let you donate blood as well, convalescent plasma or even convalescent plasma, please like do that because like those all these different things are little factors that you can do to help out a lot of those researchers as well. Like I think more than ever, like this is something that you can do a lot of outreach with different groups. And if you are still concerned or if you are like really not sure where to go next, even looking at the website, feel free to ping me and happy to assist you on what the next steps are.
Thank you for that information. Lots of love to you, Calesta. I'm so sorry. But look into that. And again, if you ever just need resources, you know, Dr. Neuro is DMs are always open. You know, he's always willing to take time and help you out and give you information to the best of his ability. So we actually were down to the final 3 questions.
Woo!
Yes. So our next question here is from Batch. Batch is asking, can you explain the difference between B cells and T cells and how they work?
Yes.
I actually don't know what they are.
So these are part of what you call the adaptive immune system. So your immune system, this is something where it might require, this is like where I was laughing because I looked at it, I was like, oh, Batch, this is going to take several hours of lecture time
I
for
guess
me
we
to
have to
talk about
squeeze it down to like a 5-minute, 10-minute.
Which we can do. I can do. I've
Mm-hmm.
done worse. So here's the thing. When we look at B cells and T cells, they're all part of like they're very intricate parts of your immune system, what we call the adaptive immune system. They're what we call the learning aspects of it. You have your innate immune system and essentially what your adaptive immune system and what essentially the T cells. So when we look at T cells versus B cells, T cells essentially you can break it out into 2 different groups. You have your CD4 plus cells and the CD8 plus cells. Those are 2 different types of T cells. And so your CD4 are basically like the T cells are their focus is basically to release cytokines and basically tell the rest of the immune system like, hey, there is an invader. We need to start gearing up, and it starts activating the B cells, which are produced in your bone marrow, to produce like antibodies. So it's like kind of like the intermediate. It's also one of the first things that HIV targets actually as well. It's actually why when you talk about HIV patients, you talk about CD4 count because that's what they first do is attack that cell and they basically cut out the middleman and say, oh, well, guess what? Your immune system can't do anything now because there's nothing there to message. You just eliminated anything that could alert your immune system. And that's why HIV is so insidious, is that it basically targets those. And so then you have your CD8 cells, which are essentially like your cytotoxic ones, which their only job is basically if they find infected cells, they kill it. That's all they do. That's why they're called cytotoxic T cells, and they're focused on kind of focusing on that aspect. So you have T cells, the helper T cells that are there to help kind of like usher the immune system to kind of get it going. Then you have the cytotoxic T cells that kill infected cells, and then you have the B cells that produce essentially the antibodies that we so love and near and dear from the vaccines as a result of it. So let's say this invader is killed. Let's say if like COVID does kill. You have a pool of essentially of like T cells and B cells that are left over. Those remain dormant essentially for a long time until like next time they encounter that pathogen. They have some memory of it, and that's kind of like the whole idea of the training, right? Like they're learning aspects of it. Once they learn of infection the first time, it's very hard for them to forget that. And so it's why, like in the situation with COVID, for example, most people never had COVID. So all those T cells and B cells, they were like, I don't know what the heck this is. So they're kind of like learning for the first time. And so it's basically them trying to adapt to it. But it's why when we talk about like virus like induced immunity versus vaccine induced immunity, like that's why like when we were mentioning how someone who had COVID beforehand getting their first shot, then their immune system basically gave them that side effect. That's essentially your memory like T cells and B cells basically saying like, hey fam, doesn't look right. I've seen this guy before, and they go haywire. And that's T cells and B cells in 3 5 minutes. And I'm sure like any immunologist who probably hears me, will probably be like, "Oh my god, you fucked that up so bad." But you left out so many details. But that's kind of like the quick snippet of T cells and B cells in a nutshell.
Batch had a follow up there. Do we know how this information is quote unquote stored by these cells?
So that's a longer process
Yeah.
based on the antigens that these so antigens so usually when infectious or invader particles comes in, they have like they present antigens. And so what happens is that your the ones that basically take those in, or those like T cells or B cells that do take those in, they incorporate that as part of their like mechanism for recognition, right? It's like a chemical signaling pathway for them to recognize it. I could go into so much more detail regarding that, but that literally is, by the way, but that whole section is 2 days worth of lecture in immunology. So yes.
Yes. Long answer, yes. Wow, that's very cool. Thank you for trying to put that into a succinct, just little nutshell of information. I understood that based on the 3 to 5 minute kind of summary.
Yeah. And like the memory aspect of the adaptive immune system is very complicated. I'll tell you that right now. Like if you mention adaptive immune system in my Discord, people will panic and run away. They'll be like, nope, not explaining it.
Wow.
Way too hard. It's just very long and elaborate, and it requires like if you try to look up like chemical signaling pathway in the immune system, like it's just
Galaxy
so
brain right there. It's a
yeah.
lot. The human body is very complex. I think that's just the, basic moral of the story here.
Yeah.
All right, so moving to our second to the last question. This is actually one that I asked based on something that I saw pop up on Twitter. What is your opinion or further insight on lectins, a supposed quote unquote secret weapon as a new defense against COVID 19 based on recent research by the UBC Life Sciences Institute? And how does it work?
So lectins are proteins that are specifically attached to proteins that are specifically attracted to carbohydrates. So what we're looking at here specifically is that this is the paper you were sharing with me, so I had to like take a look at it. So their assumption was the fact that SARS-CoV-2 had some sort of sugar glycoside chain that were attached to it. And as a result, the idea was that those glycoside chain or the sugar chains were essentially would be sites that lectin would attach to and gunk it up, as they say. So it prevents it from like infecting a cell. So as a kind of a briefer update, when we look at SARS-CoV-2, we look at spike protein because that's essentially what attaches to the ACE2 receptor on our human cells, and it affects it that way. So what their paper was assuming and they're hypothesizing here is that, well, what if we basically took that spike protein, wrapped it around with like a bunch of crap, or lectin in this case, or anything like that sort. And I'm simplifying the paper a little bit, and made it so that it makes it very difficult for them to attach to human cells. What would happen that way? Now, on paper, I would say it looks kind of cool, but I'm going to be honest in that I don't see it really being. I see it very difficult from it being a therapeutic option, just because lectin also, by the way, like you don't want too much of it because in a human body, by the way, you can induce toxicity symptoms as a result of high lectin, so you don't want that. There's also some complications just in general, like how we can fine tune it in a human case scenario. So in their example, they did it in a limited in vitro situation. So here we would need to look at, if we did look at it from a human sample, we would need to see very much one, it has to be a therapeutic that's very easy to administer, that doesn't cause a lot of side effects or issues that like hydroxychloroquine, for example, where it's like a very small window of like efficacy, which even not even then that's guaranteed. And it also has to be in a way that we have to see like significant like mortality decrease rate, right? Like right now we know dexamethasone is one of the more therapeutic options that's out there, the corticosteroid. But for lectin to be one, it would need to be something around that realm of efficacy for us to be considering it. I'm not shutting it down just yet, but it does need additional work for me to kind of really take a head, like, I guess, like, look at it and be like, I don't know whether if this is more effective than our own innate immune system, or whether if this is something that we should just be looking at otherwise. But again, like, prioritization right now should be vaccination, because we should never get to the point where we have to worry about treating people. So, I mean, that's kind of like the priority aspect of it. But I think I would just need to see what the updated research will look like. It's a start. It's a very, very small baby step start for a research aspect, but it needs significant amount of work in terms of like proposing how they intend to administer and how they intend to monitor therapeutic option wise before I would consider it being like, oh, that's something we should really look at.
Okay. Thank you for that insight. Because I think, especially a lot of the media that covers anything that's quote unquote new like this, there is some sensationalism, and we don't want people to think, oh, this is the answer, this is the solution, right? So
Hmm.
it's always good to, uh, you know, look into it
I mean,
more.
they had some cool videos. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. They had some pretty decent like interaction videos. I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. So I'm not gonna shout it down and say like this is stupid paper, but I think it has promise. But I think it just needs a lot of work before we get to the point where it's like this is a
Hmm.
solution.
Yeah. I watched one of those videos. I was like, that's actually really cool.
Hmm.
All right, so we're out to the final question. Yay. This has been awesome. But this is from Vinius asking, what will the statistics of COVID look like in a month? 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Where will it be safest and not safest places to travel?
I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I don't know. If I knew that, then I would win a Nobel Prize
Yeah,
for
I think this is
that.
hard to predict.
I think that's very hard to predict. So I can't honestly tell you without literally bullshitting. It'll be like a
Yeah.
very educated bullshit, but it'll be bullshit nonetheless. What will be the safest and not safest places to travel? I mean, you'll know based on vaccination rates, right? Like, I could tell you right now, like a lot of certainly the G10 countries, like a lot of rich countries, I don't foresee it being an issue with most of the people vaccinated and things like that. Unsafe areas, I mean, it's like probably areas that have like impoverished communities and lower middle income countries that are still probably going to have cases of COVID if we don't get our act together. So I don't know what it's going to look like for the future. Right now, and I was talking about this with someone else, Dr. Yami from Duke. Um, we have a 3 to 6 month window to act on this, to really act on this before the next winter cycle hits, and also other stuff. And we need to be much more vigilant about getting the rest of the world vaccinated as quickly as possible, because our window is slowly withering away, and we can't rely on the factor that this is going to this is going to be an opportunity we'll always have, and we have to get ahead of the game against the variant. And right now we're slightly ahead of it, thank God, but that lead might not always exist if we continue not vaccinating the rest of the world. So how it will look like in 12 months, I don't know. I'm hopeful. I'll tell you right now, like, so people who are doom gloom, I can tell you right now, I'm hopeful. Um, I hope that the rest of the world is able to pull their shit together and get the rest of the world vaccinated and get the vaccines out to the rest of the countries. But again, none of us are safe until everyone is safe. It's a statement that everyone will say for the most part.
Yeah, very good. Well, that was the last question. So,
You sure there's
any.
no other five hidden questions?
Yeah, I know, right? Explain everything. Go. But
Okay.
yeah, any last, I guess, remarks you want to impart that you want people to walk away from these discussions with?
Um, I think the only thing I would say is like we need to be one, really, we need to keep the dialogue focused on the rest of the world and getting their vaccines. The United States and everyone, we have enough vaccines. I can tell you right now, even if we vaccinate all the children and everything like that, we'll still have a surplus of vaccines. So please don't stress out about the fact that if we decide to donate to the rest of the country, that we're not going to have enough. That's misinformation right there. So don't believe that. So focus the conversation back on global equitable distribution of vaccines. Second, um, I know people will encounter, vaccine hesitant people, um, and I say vaccine hesitant folks. Uh, be patient with them, ask questions, talk to them, let them do the talking or whatever. Like, don't be antagonistic towards them because that's the least thing you want to do. If you do encounter like outright trolls, anti-vaxxers, and people who are belligerent, disengage, block. Don't engage with them. Like you have to curate your own safe space as well. So don't engage. If you don't feel confident in talking with people who are vaccine hesitant, there are folks out there who do, like me, and other who are out there who are willing to do that. There's even like some Instagram accounts I do follow that do great like Q&A sessions on Instagram Live, and I'm doing one right now with Snow on Twitch. So we do these, and I do with any other Twitch streamers as well. If you are a Twitch streamer, I'm happy to come onto your community and talk as well. Third, be cautious of misinformation. Like this is like one of the more like COVID has presented one of the most complex cases of misinformation, disinformation campaign ever in history. Not to say it's the worst, but it's definitely one of the more complicated ones. And so be careful about how you're getting your information. Even something as simple as like Snow and I mentioned, saying like it's the India virus, like that's misinformation because it's not necessarily us saying that India was the one who generated this virus. It's basically that's the one where we first identified it as. There's careful verbiage behind that. And then I guess like finally four, you know, um, don't let it. I know it's very easy right now, especially since we're like so at the end of like I guess like a year into this pandemic and everything to be emotional about it. Don't let emotion guide your response. That's like one of the last things anyone, no matter if they're pro, hesitant, or anti-vaccines, that's not productive in any way. If you're going to be emotional and everything like that, that's like it's healthy to have those emotions, but that's separated from like how we're dealing with the COVID and everything like that. There are resources out there. There are places that you can talk to. There are a lot of places out there that are willing to do it, that do it for free. You just got to be willing to look for it. And yeah, that's it from me for the most part.
Sweet. Well, thank you. We have one absolute final question here that Vinius was just asking. Is there any relationship between staying clean and like having good hygiene and COVID?
I mean, there's not really like a relationship because we know that it's not transferred via, hand, like, surfaces or anything like that. But you should probably still clean yourself because there are other nasty bacteria and infectious diseases out there that like, what I call sweaty crotch juice.
Mm-hmm.
So please wash yourself and don't let yourself be a site of other crap that's out there.
Yeah.
And again, like it's also good for your mental health too to continuously take showers. Like one of the many things that's helped people for maintaining mental health is routine. Even if you're not commuting anymore, even though you're not doing anything, like for me, for example, I still wake up, I work out, I take a shower, eat a quick breakfast, I go to work. Like I try to, and I maintain that through the week because I like to maintain a schedule. And I know like even one of my friends who was out of a job, she still woke up at 7 a.m. Showered, worked out, and focused on job applications for the rest of the day. She made a schedule because that does help from like a mental perspective as well. So maintaining schedules works.
Very good. Thank you. Well, Dr. Neuro, I just want to give a massive thank you to you for taking time, not only just now, but also previously. This is your second session with us.
Uh-huh.
And I just want to give a big thank you for taking time out of your schedule to sit down with our community, to talk, to answer all of our questions. We had so many questions. So I do hope that you enjoyed sitting down with us and chatting.
Yeah, and I'm always in Snow's Discord. I'm also I'm always lurking in Snow's channel, as she has noticed. You just literally type neuro in the question, and if I'm checking around, I might come by. Or if I don't, ping me on the Discord. Like, I literally make myself available to anyone who has questions. And again, I'm on Twitter and things like that, and you guys can DM me on there. I try to make myself as available as possible. Sometimes I might not be able to answer your question immediately, but if Batch comes up to me and says, I need you to give me a lecture on Immunology 101, I probably would delete that DM. I like just
Called
teasing him.
out.
But I mean, I think that if you guys have like questions or any kind of concerns, like, like, there are people like not just me, like as much as I would like to claim like I'm like the only science communicator, there are a lot of good folks out there that I'd recommend that you take a look at. You do great science communication. And you'll know there are the good doctors out there who are just wanting to provide information. None of us are being compensated. I wish I was getting money from Pfizer and Moderna because I wouldn't be, I'd be living in a penthouse in the middle of downtown Manhattan. But, like I do this out of the kindness of my heart, and also just because I want everyone to have the right information and or else to like know what direction they need to go for good information. So thank you again to Snow for having me for your community, not once but twice. I know you kind of jumped on the gun when I mentioned that I was offering availability, and you're the first one that kind of jumped on availability. So your community, for Snow's community, you guys should thank her for kind of
No.
jumping on that initiative.
Well, I do encourage, all broadcasters out there, if there's any other streamers on Twitch that end up encountering this, again, Dr. Neuro has offered to do this no matter what size your Twitch community is. Doesn't matter how many viewers you have, he will take the time to answer questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Neuro. So one last time, I know you've done this so many times. Please introduce yourself. Again, let us know where we can find you. My mods, please drop the links for Dr. Neuro in chat. But yeah, just let us know one last time who you are, what you do, and where to find you.
All right. I'm Neurofourier, or Dr. Neurofourier, or Dr. Neuro, or Neuro. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, all under the same name. And I'm a infectious disease expert within the U.S. State Department, focusing on humanitarian crisis settings and a lot of displaced populations and vulnerable populations. And basically been working on a lot of the COVID response for the past year or so. My focus mainly on a lot of Twitter really is posting to-date information, posting up-to-date news regarding it, and also just talking through common, misinformation and, being able to correct those on the record. And so I available all of those, and that's where you can reach me.
All right. Thank you once again, Dr. Neuro. Give some extra love to Bucket for us. Who's the name of your other cat?
Mako. She was walking around. I guess she
Yeah,
just went
some
back
people
into
in chat saw her earlier and they pointed out. It's like, there's another cat in the house.
That's Mako. It's kind of like your situation. I have an older female cat and then the younger male cat, and Bucket's the younger male cat, and he tortures the older female cat constantly. Like, he'll try to roughhouse with her, and she's just like, no, I won't have any of it, and she'll run away. But she's happy. She's a happy cat. So they're both adorable and very loud when I need to sleep in 2 a.m. in the morning.
No, I know that. That's what Knight's been. He's just yowling all the time. Cats. Can't live with them, can't live without them. Anyhow, well, thank you again so much, Dr. Neuro. You have a great rest of your evening and a wonderful week. We will see you in Discord. We will see you on Twitch. We'll see you on Twitter.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks so much. See you later.
All the things. Take care. Good night.